Boom.
Good evening, everybody. This is the Planning Board meeting of November 21st, 2023. First of all, my name is Kathy Barnard, and I'll introduce the other Planning Board members. Starting at my left is Vaughn Dugan, and next to Vaughn is Roger Murray, then Doug Braskin, who is the Vice Chairman. To my right is John Thurston, and then Brad Harriman, who is a representative from the Board of Selectmen, and Julie Jacobs, who is an alternate. Peter Goodwin is not here. Julie, would you be willing to sit in his place?
Yes, I will.
All right, great, thank you. Okay, the first item on the agenda is a public hearing. This is the Beckwith Family Trust, Robert Beckwith, 16 Libby Street. This issue, it was for a conditional use permit for an accessory dwelling unit. The application will not be heard tonight. It has been renoticed and will be heard on December 5th. So anyway, will not be heard on tonight, the 21st. Okay, so then we can go on to the next item, and we have two discussion items. I'd like to change the order, if that's all right with people. And B is shorefront residential regulations, and I'd like to go through that. We've been through it several times, and Tavis sent us a draft. If we could look at that one and see if we're in agreement, then we can set this item for a public hearing so that it can be on the town warrant in March. So, Tavis, do you want to go through the changes?
Sure.
And as you're going along, if anybody's got any questions, why don't you bring it up, or comments or whatever, just bring it up now, okay?
Okay. So this particular draft, nothing changes in 175-62, 60, or 63. 175-64, specifically 175-64A2. There seemed to be quite a bit of discussion between using the carrots, or how I was trained with the alligator eating the larger number, but leaving the words in. But what this does is clarify that less than 75 feet has a setback of 10, 75 feet to less than 100 feet is 15, 100 to less than 150 feet is 20 feet, and 150 feet or more is 25 feet with regard to side yard setbacks. Nothing then changes in 64B or C or D. Under 175-65 permitted uses, the addition of B, one single detached dwelling per lot with accessory dwelling unit.
I believe that should be one single detached dwelling unit per lot with one attached accessory dwelling unit. The word attached should be inserted.
Thank you, Roger. I was just thinking the same thing.
It could be attached. No, I don't believe the other zones say attached, but
If it does say attached, then we'll have to go back and fix it later.
Well, if it says just
Just
one
say
accessory
yes.
dwelling, that means it's detached.
no.
No, it doesn't.
No, we don't
If
have
it says one accessory dwelling unit, it can be attached or detached, and there are other ordinances in our code that require it to be attached. So if we leave it the way it is, then we don't have to go back and change it, should detached versus attached change later on.
But it'll do a wonderful job of creating confusion. And hopefully detached will never be allowed.
So I think in this case, it's helpful to have it written attached, and we can change it later if it changes.
Yep.
Well, I think I would ask if the board wants it to read the way all of the others are written in the ordinance, or do you want this one to be different?
They'll have to match. Everybody's going to match.
Because, for example, in the
like that.
residential district, it says one single detached dwelling unit per lot with one accessory dwelling unit.
I think we should go for consistency.
Right.
I
Yeah.
agree with that. Either we change them all or we change none and let them look up the rest of it.
Right.
I don't care either way.
So if the board wants to add a word, I would recommend a motion to adding a word. If not, we can continue.
Continue.
I think we should add a word so that people reading the ordinance, but in every zone where it applies.
What's the word that you want to add?
Attached.
Attached.
Attached. Until we change it, and then we have to change them all.
Well, I think the way it was worded originally did not include the word attached, so that the accessory dwelling unit ordinance section would control.
Right.
If we were to change it in every instance, does that require a warrant article?
Be a separate warrant article to each zone, adding
Yikes.
the word detached.
Yeah.
It would not be a warrant article for residential and a warrant article for village residential and a warrant, for each zone. But it would require a separate article to change B under permitted uses in every zone to read with one attached accessory dwelling unit.
So can we just reference the code that is the definition of what a dwelling, ADU means in our town?
You can, but that also is different from all the other zones that just say
Yeah,
one
we're
accessory
trying to
dwelling
make
unit.
it consistent, right? That was the purpose of
I'll
adding it.
withdraw my suggestion.
Oh, no, I think it's a fine suggestion, but it does add a potential source of error should the ADU section later change, and then you have to change everything accordingly.
Right.
Not that anyone is proposing that for those watching at home. The
Okay,
next,
so is everybody all right with it? Yeah,
Yes.
Okay, all
I'm
right.
okay with that.
so I'm not going to go through little things like B becoming C and C becoming D because of the renumbering. But when I refer to it, I'm going to use the underlined, not the stricken letter. So in D2, 17565 D2, the goal here was to make the definition in shorefront residential match that in 175 word usage and definitions. And I believe that is what is reflected in the draft you're looking at.
I
Right.
have a stupid question. Why is there two sets of around boathouse? We got feet marks and we got quotes. What's the difference?
The inner set of quotes, it's hard to tell, but that's a strike through.
Okay. All right.
I had the same question.
So if we're sticking with the theory of the last argument, which I'm fine with, you can look up elsewhere what boathouse means.
So one of my original suggestions was to remove the definition here to let the definition section control, but the board decided that repetition is better than having people look
So we should be
elsewhere.
consistent.
Well, last year's mode was to take all the definitions out of the individual ordinances and refer to the definition section, but boathouse seemed to be specific enough that the board elected to keep it in shorefront residential.
And in this instance,
Although boathouse only can occur in the shorefront residential.
and in this instance, it specifically says for the purpose of this subsection, so it doesn't apply to other subsections.
Right.
Correct.
Right.
Anywho. So no changes in 3 or 4.
So wait, shall we talk about pitched roof? It has to have a pitched roof?
That is the current definition in 175, is a
Right.
facility with a permanent pitched roof.
Yeah, and there was a lot of discussion about that at the time, I think. I remember correctly.
I think the reason that the pitched roof becomes, a permanent pitched roof is in the definition is because there are those that have installed, I'll say, canvas covers, which also technically meet the definition, but they don't have a permanent pitched roof. So if you have a canvas cover over your dock that happens to cover where the boat is, one could argue under the ordinance, the way it's written, that you don't have to get a special permit for a boathouse. So if you require it to have a permanent pitched roof, it limits boathouse replacement to true boathouse replacement by definition, as opposed to pseudo boathouse replacement,
I-
which,
I-
believe it or not, is more critical than you might think.
Yeah, but I get that, but so you can't have a flat-roofed permanent boathouse?
Correct.
Correct. And the one that was most recently approved actually has a one pitch for that purpose. You can sit on it comfortably, but it's technically not flat.
All right.
It also doesn't say it has to have a 10-12 pitch or a 6-12 pitch or,
How about a permanent roof?
Well, I think the purpose of the pitched roof was so that you didn't have a deck.
Yes, right, I think so. That's what I remember.
Yeah, but Tav has just stated that it's being used as a deck. 'Cause it's-
Right, yeah. Well, that's-
So,
So to avoid that, you'd want to have a pitched roof and specify the pitch.
I mean, how far does the board really want to go with this? There's really no practical way to make sure that it's only used or solely used as a docking facility. The fact, I mean, if you have lawn chairs in your boathouse, are you technically in violation of your boathouse? Question mark. At what point do you do more than store boats? Keep in mind that people, I mean, not that, should be looking at it in principle, not in exact examples, but there are many boathouses in town that are, now have retractable floors so that the boats can go down underneath and the floors come in over the top, so now you have a covered recreation area. Or covered boat storage, however you want to put it on your application. So yes, the fact that it has to have a pitched roof means it can't be dead flat, but it could have a 0.5/12 pitch. Nowhere does it say in the regulations you can't sit on your roof.
No, but making it pitched discourages that usage.
Yeah, it could.
And also, it's now consistent with the definition.
Yep.
Yes, I'm not sure
Right.
why there ever was a separate definition created, but now it does match, yes.
Yeah, right.
So no change in 3 or 4, turning the page. Notice the page numbers, Roger.
I
On
did.
page 3,
I noticed the page numbers, and I also noted the date, which I appreciate.
it's the little things. So then we get down, the next change is in 17567. Reflected in the example that was presented to the board was the no greater than 30% of area of a lot within the protected shoreline may be composed of impervious surfaces. The board did generally agree that that should be listed first. So that's why it was kept as A. B then will read just as it shows. I did make one change from what the board had discussed. That's at the end of that paragraph. So everyone, it used to say, proposed development which may include but are not limited to a rain garden infiltration trench, pervious driveways, dry wells, among others, comma, I've suggested of sufficient capacity to infiltrate the increased stormwater generated by the increase in impervious surface area proposed with the project. So if someone is going from 15 to 18%, they have to at least demonstrate the capture of that 3%, which is something that the ordinance currently reads with those over 20%, but didn't say anything about 15 to 20%. The reason I'm suggesting it, quite honestly, is that particular morning when this idea came to me, somebody came in and said, well, how big a rain garden do I need to put in? Can I just have a little hole in the front yard and make it look like a rain garden? So if the public is reading it that way, I think the intent, the board intended was to pick up the increase from precondition to postcondition in an infiltration mechanism, which is slightly different than where Wolfeboro Waters may have suggested capturing all stormwater. And if I'm misrepresenting that, that was just me mishearing it.
Yeah.
Correct, which I think in this case, you know, if the existing condition is 16%, you're going to 18%, you should at least have to capture that delta in stormwater.
so when you talk about the rain garden, there's two types of rain gardens. There's a rain garden similar to the church over here, which is just a depression in the ground, which is soil, and then the water runs in and it kind of filters out a little bit. And then there's the real rain garden that has dig down 4 feet down, and you've got 2 feet of 1.5 inch stone, and then you've got a media mix that's soil, peat, and wood chip, and then you have 3 inches of mulch on top of that, and that's a real rain garden. So I don't know what we're asking the applicants to do.
Well, the current regulation says rain garden, infiltration trench, pervious pavers, dry wells, et cetera, but it doesn't say how big or what type. So with this, I'm suggesting that it has to be at least the volume to pick up that increase in stormwater created by the project. Whether it's a real rain garden, air quotes, or a depression that catches that slug of water.
So that's come up in front of us before, and I've asked the applicant's agent, I said, so how much water is that rain garden going to capture? And they honestly can't give you an answer.
So it's not a homeowner, you need an engineer to do this.
That was an engineer.
Well, I think the intent here is good in that the goal here is for them to be able to capture and infiltrate the generated stormwater regardless of the means. And then we have to determine how we verify that they've done that.
Well, typically what is submitted with a plan is somebody shows a rain garden and it has a dimension, a 3D dimension of what that rain garden will be, but there's no required capacity element under the current regulation. So I'm saying at least demonstrate that if the additional 2% or 500 square feet, that 500 square feet generates X amount of stormwater, and that rain garden or depression will hold that water.
So this is an example. So if you dig down and do the real rain garden that has washed, crushed stone, that's pore space, and you can calculate that pore space. If you just do a rain garden that's just a cupped area on the ground, there is no pore space, there is no capacity. The only capacity is the
volume,
bowl
the
of
volume
the
of the
area.
depression, right?
Which you can still calculate, it's just a much
You
smaller
can-
area.
You can,
Yeah.
that's correct.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think this change here puts that requirement onto the the lot owner and the engineer to provide that calculation to us, not have us, try and determine, you need a larger rain garden, whatever there. It's going to require them to come in with that, okay, that extra 3% that Tavis was talking about is going to be X amount of gallons on a, 20-year storm, whatever storm they're designing for. And this basin here that I've designed for you will capture and infiltrate that amount. So I think this does capture that requirement to have that information presented to us.
Okay. Do you agree, John? Okay.
Yeah, I disagree with that, but before I get there, I think it was 2 or 3 drafts ago, what we were presented with from Wolfeboro Waters was language that, after the impervious surface limitation, said for projects adding 225 square feet or more of impervious surface, a plan, survey, or letter of certification prepared by, and that drafter's appropriate professional is required to establish the percentage of impervious coverage on a lot. And that has been deleted, and we need somebody who's going to determine, when we had that discussion, there was, well, do you make it 225? If somebody wants to put up a 6-foot addition on his deck, does that trigger it? But we need somebody who's going to determine how much the existing lot coverage, impervious coverage is, in order to determine what the increase is and what would trigger that requirement, which is where I think we left that discussion.
I had originally suggested when that conversation came up that it be 200 square feet, because projects that don't, a freestanding structure up to 200 square feet doesn't require a building permit. And I brought it up because if somebody just wants to put a tough shed in their yard, do they really need to get an engineer involved? And the answer is, well, they might. I don't care if a building permit's required. We're looking at impervious surface. So I think the board needs to address the question, if you get to the point where you're increasing impervious, should an engineer be involved? And if that's the direction of the board, that can be added to this language.
Why would we go with your 200 square feet
Well, 200,
or some other figure? But at some point, we need a note from your mother doesn't do it.
correct. And the problem I have with 200 square feet is if you're on a 5-acre lot, 200 square feet obviously doesn't need a shorefront permit. But it might if it already has a 3-acre mansion on it. So I'm almost arguing myself back to all plans requiring
All plans
An engineer.
requiring what?
an engineer to determine existing.
Well, I thought that is what we had discussed.
Well, it is, but there's a lot of pushback for somebody doing a 50 square foot
right.
patio enlargement and
Which is
having
why we
to,
put that wording in.
correct.
Right.
So what I'm saying is the square foot is not a good measure because that varies dramatically with lot size. I reviewed 2 permits today. One of them added 6,000 square feet of impervious. It was a 1% change. I did another one where they had a 50-foot increase and it was a 9% change. It all depends on your lot size.
Okay, folks, what do you want to do here?
I mean, I think a 200 square foot structure is pretty small, no matter what size your lot is. There ought to be some little bit amount of relief for your garden shed. So I would say for a project over 200 square feet that will result in a 15 to 20%, blah, 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 the rest.
Well, Vaughn, I think that the number of square feet you've suggested is fine. The problem comes into when you get to calculating the percentage, who's going to calculate that? And, to use Roger's term, a note from your mother, you just going to take the lot owner's word for it? I don't know if that's appropriate.
Well, for the procedurally, no one ever just takes a note from the mother.
Yeah.
If somebody comes in and they have a 3,000 square foot house and you can actually sit down on the online tax maps with an air photo and come up with a crude calculation and see if their numbers are within a couple hundred square feet. You really don't need an engineer for that.
Okay.
But that's my rule. It doesn't say that in here. I think we always, as the people issuing the permit or determining whether a permit's required, we always have the ability to say, yes, it looks like your mom signed it, but I don't think she was paying attention.
But the tax map's not going to tell you what size the paved driveway is.
Correct. Well,
So you've got
but-
other factors
Well,
there.
but if they're within, if a crude look says, well, look, it looks like they're within, even a couple hundred square feet or even 1,000 square feet, depending on the lot size, it's not going to change the number. Where it becomes very interesting to me is when somebody comes in at 14.98% and it's not done by an engineer. I raise the question. I don't know how to put that in the regulation. That's a permitting issue more than a regulation.
But I don't think the lot size matters because if you're talking about the shorefront, you're going to have somebody sitting 50 feet back with all this impervious coverage. And the fact that he has nothing in the 100 feet or 200 feet behind him doesn't make that much difference.
That's not how the regs read.
Well, okay, 250 feet back or.
Right.
Okay,
I think there should be something in there that triggers when you have to get an engineer or a surveyor to determine the coverage. And
I would-
I'm not sure you need to do it for somebody's garden shed.
So what are we really focusing on? What's our distance from the shoreline that we're really trying to focus on?
Well, 250 feet by regulation.
So
So you're allowed up
does
to
that trigger-
30% within 250 feet.
Does that trigger a shoreland permit through the state?
Yes.
No, everything requires, everything that goes through this process is already going through the state process.
So
Like,
that's
this
what I'm-
actually requires submission of the state permit with this.
So when somebody goes to do that, they've they've kind of had to validate it, no? Or is it
Right.
still
I
funny
don't,
math?
I don't know what the state requires them to do. I don't know if the state requires an engineer to do that.
Well, it would be the next best thing rather than nobody. If we followed that process and just used what they submitted to the state. They give 5 copies, one goes to the selectmen, one goes to the planning board. I mean, so I don't know how that process would benefit.
Well, the only thing I can suggest is that we have a new A that says pre-project impervious surface coverage be determined by a licensed engineer or surveyor, and go from there. You could simply re-letter 175-67A1A to say what I just said, and then everything else carry down.
Say it again.
But that, so 175-67, big A, 1, little a, would now read, all pre-project impervious surface cover to be determined by a licensed surveyor or engineer.
You said all.
Right.
All.
And that gets back to some of the earlier discussion we had, where if somebody wants to put an extra 6 feet on their patio that might be small in the scheme of things, they still need a licensed engineer before they get approval.
That's the hangup,
Yeah.
right there.
So I think it's probably an undue burden for small projects.
That would be an undue burden.
Right.
Or it could say, all projects,
Because a 225 is a 15 by 15 shed.
Yeah.
but if that 15 by 15 shed puts you at 31%, you just broke the law.
Right.
Yeah, I would just say I'm
So
taking the
that's
bricks
why
from
the
the
square
side of the
footage
house.
doesn't work.
I'm just going to take the bricks from the side of the house and lay them out in the back. Now I just created impervious.
Correct.
I have one.
The permit I looked at yesterday said, oh, I'm over on impervious, I'll just add more porous pavement. Done. I mean, this, I'm not trying to minimize anything. This is the game that they play to stay under certain numbers.
Well, and that's one of the things we're trying to address.
Right. What I'm telling the board is square footage doesn't work, because there are times when 225 square feet seems inane, and there are times when that could push someone to 31%. And the only way to know that is to have somebody document what the existing coverage is. If nothing else, they're doing it for future owners of the property. At one point in time, an engineer or a surveyor determined that they were at 28.2%.
So the one problem is that triggers all sorts of things like boundaries. I mean, it's not an inexpensive proposition.
No. I don't think it really needs to be in there. My suggestion is that there's enough information out there generally available for properties that unless it is clear that somebody's just made it up, i.e. the note from mother, it really is sort of irrelevant.
So how do you check? You just look on the tax maps, GIS?
Look on the tax maps, you can go out and look at it.
Google
They've applied for a
Maps,
permit,
yeah.
yeah. I mean, if somebody submits an application, they say the existing house is 5,000 square feet, and you pull up the tax card and it says it's 15,000, we have a problem. Either with the assessor or with the applicant.
So are you saying this is not a problem in the building department?
In practice, it has not been a problem. And the reason, what I'm basing that on is we don't really know the magic of the 15 and the 20 and the 30.
Well, it used to be just 30, but now it's got 15 and 20.
Correct.
Yeah.
And insofar, I mean, when someone is trying to use the letter from mom, they typically don't know what these numbers are when they come into play. So they try and do everything to the best of their ability, and they come in and they say, well, now you're at 16%, now you've got to do this, or now you're at 18%, you've got to do this. The application form really doesn't seem to care until they're over 20%.
Okay, folks, what do you want to do?
I'm not inclined to make it universally expensive. I mean, I think trying to allow people to be compliant is good. And I think if the building department can, look at the literature that we have on hand and say, okay, this does not pass the laugh test. I
Yeah,
don't know how you write that in here, but.
That's how all permits go. If
Yeah.
somebody turns in a building permit and they're showing you a 5-story building,
Yeah,
it's-
okay, well, let's, I'm trying to get so we can move on here.
I understand, but I don't think board members understand how permits get reviewed generally. So it's helpful perhaps to know that in order to know what the regulation's going to do.
So Vaughn, if I understand you correctly, you're happy to leave it as it's written in this latest draft, is that right?
If the building department is comfortable looking at things and saying this is clearly over the limit and we need to have we need to trigger some mechanism that you can require a engineer.
I mean, another way to go about this would be under 175-67A1I, where a submitted application appears to present a discrepancy between submitted information and information known to the permit reviewer. Reviewer has the authority to require surveyor engineer verification. That at least would be the board authorizing the building inspector or shorefront permit reviewer the option to say, and as in Vaughn's words, this doesn't pass the laugh test. Now you've got to go prove it. And honestly, 90% of the time, shorefront permit requests are made by people that may not necessarily be too burdened by the expense of that.
And they're usually going for much more, but this, let's just say,
Correct.
somebody who has a property in their family for 100 years, and they want to add a shed. Like, let's not make it too cumbersome.
Correct. To me, the cost-benefit analysis for someone to worry about 14.9 versus 15% is not worthy of that expense. But that's just an opinion.
I think I tend to agree with Vaughn that we go with the latest wording.
With I, adding
With the I?
the reviewer has the option to request.
Adding the I.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. Is everybody all right with that?
So I'm going to try and get this close so you can agree to it. So if during the course of application review, a question of pre-project impervious cover is raised, applicant,
How about impervious surfaces?
sure, impervious surfaces. Applicant may be required to provide
An engineer's report?
new information
Right.
provided by a licensed surveyor engineer.
Right.
Yeah, and that gives some
Yeah.
discretion to the town officials.
And I wouldn't say impervious surfaces, I would just say impervious area.
Well,
Well, which
impervious surfaces is defined in the zoning ordinance.
Oh, is it?
When we looked at this, we tried to get consistency, because there were different terms being used in different places.
So if during course of application review, a question is raised regarding pre-project impervious surface area, applicant may be required to submit revised plans prepared by a licensed surveyor engineer.
Yes.
Okay. Okay,
Okay,
so then back to C.
Well, I'm still...
Nope, not yet, all right.
I would delete A, because it is better addressed in D on the next page, and in one sense, it's kind of meaningless, because if you've got over 30% to start with, you've got a non-conforming situation, and you're not going to be required to take it up.
so where do you
so-
want that in?
Strike A and renumber
Strike
accordingly.
A, and D, G on the next page explains it much better.
Okay, do you want to put that where A is now? or-
No, I'd leave it where it is
Oh, okay, all
and
right.
just read letter.
D,
Okay, so we're striking A.
Yeah,
so what that does is the new I just became H. So people don't get lost. Renumbering doesn't really get voted on, but just so everything keeps current.
So I wonder if it shouldn't be right up front as an A.
That's what the board
and get-
originally
and
agreed
Get rid
to.
of G because that's too far deep.
Yeah, right, right. I think
Move
we
G
did
to
talk
A.
about that.
Just so that it's clear right up front what we're getting to. No more than 30%.
Yeah,
okay.
it's the hard rule first.
Yeah.
Okay,
So what's the
G-
board want? Keep A as shown in the draft, or
G becomes A.
Yeah, delete the current A and move the current G into A.
So we're down one letter, but G becomes A.
And then,
How's that?
so draft H becomes A.
and then I'd refer to lot coverage consistently in that.
No, draft G becomes A.
A. A just goes away.
Impervious lot coverage what, Roger?
Yeah,
No development
letter
shall
are you
increase
on?
impervious lot coverage?
which is now A.
There are several instances where their impervious cover is used in some cases and impervious surface is used in others, and it might be best to use one or the other rather than mixing the terms.
And the motion is for,
Well, the ordinance refers to the lot coverage of 30% in the shorefront district, which is why I was suggesting using that.
Cover,
impervious surface?
cover, not surface.
Coverage,
Cover rather than surface.
no, coverage is, it's,
I don't know.
it's 175-64D, percentage maximum allowable lot coverage, 30%.
So let's stick with coverage.
And if that's what we're talking about.
Okay.
I think surfaces becomes confusing. Coverage is,
It does, especially when you try and explain it to an applicant
Right.
who say, well, the water falls through the deck, why is it impervious?
right.
Well, yeah, I think we tried, when we went over this, we tried to get consistency, and as long as we use one, I'm fine with that.
Okay. No other change on 4.
Well, I'm still at it here.
Oh, we're back on 3, okay.
We're back on B. I would suggest revising that to read for a project on a lot that will result in, I guess we're now in between, in impervious coverage of between 15 and 20%. At least one stormwater control measure shall be implemented, and then add and maintained in the proposed development. Then you go through, I'd add nest to rain gardens for consistency, and I would end the sentence at others, because I think that it should require that if you've got 15% coverage and you're adding 3%, addressing the 3% doesn't do all that much for you. You should be addressing the 18% with your stormwater management plan.
But you're allowed to maintain the 15%. Just
But
be-
you want to expand it.
I hear what you're saying. I'm looking for reaction from,
I don't think we can go back and tell them to paint the other side of the house if it wasn't painted before, right? We can't tell you to go back and do something if you're not touching that, right?
what he's suggesting.
I know.
But you are touching it.
If I'm just
You're
painting the front
increasing-
side of the house, why can you tell me I got to do the other three sides if it doesn't need it?
Well, there's two.
That's not similar at all.
There's two types of projects, really. So one of them is an existing house with a driveway, and they want to put a detached something or other over there, and that increases stormwater. Typically, what's done now is they capture the stormwater for the new thing. The other version, which is where I'm hearing Roger go, is you have the 1950s camp, you nuke everything and put in 18%, therefore you should be held to the 18%. So I think there's two different things happening.
You're got to look at all the big trees and the ledge that around some of these older places. You may be doing more destruction than you're going to accomplish doing something as benefit. It's really...
So to me, if you go to my first example where someone is leaving their house and building a detached structure, technically there's no trigger for the existing house to come into compliance because it's under the percentage. But if you're adding and crossing the 15% line or adding between you might be at 17 and you're going to 19. The new structure needs to have the stormwater. So the question is, does the board want the new structure to cover it, or do you want the resulting percentage to control the entire property regardless of what the project is? Because there's also quite a cost with that. Putting in...
I don't think we can require people to go back and do that.
I think
Honestly.
you can if you make another distinction in the regulations to say if you're going to come in and raise everything to 0 and then build to 18.
Oh, that's new.
Well, that's different when you
That's
take it
new.
down.
But I don't
Yeah.
think just because you're going from 16 to 18, you can hold them at 18. If they're not changing the original 16,
Well, if somebody's already completed construction, it's going to be pretty hard to go back and open that can of worms back up to retrofit something to something else that's off to another area. Sounds kind of complicated.
well, that's why I suggested the sentence that's in there. Sufficient capacity to infiltrate the increased stormwater generated by the increase in impervious. Now, if the practitioner note is to say if somebody raises it to dirt, then you have to treat the whole boat.
Well, we could do for completely new construction.
Well, yeah, but then you get to somebody trying to skirt the rules will leave a tenth of the building in place.
Right. I mean, you can always hope that, they're putting in a new garage that, since we're going to get new landscaping stuff, that they'll include some more stuff, But I honestly don't think that we can require you to go back and fix the ancient house drainage.
Well, given the number of cyanobacteria blooms we've had lately, that might be a good idea.
Well,
We
I think...
want one of the most important, what our economy is based on, to be kept in good shape, or,
I don't know, I would think that would be more septic loads and
Yeah.
certain areas myself. I mean,
And even then, you can't do anything until something completely fails. You know what I mean? You can't just say, I don't like what you got, fix it. You can't just tell people that. It doesn't work.
In practical terms, when somebody is raising everything on the site and building a new structure, they are treating all the water.
yes.
Yes,
The
that's new.
building code today requires the foundation drain, it requires the gutters to be piped into an infiltration mechanism. So even though the house is 4 times the size and they're only at 18%, they're actually treating almost 100% more water than the original structure that just dumped everything off to the side and went into the lake.
But again, if you've got a complete house that's been landscaped and everything, you're not going to go back there and make them tear the place around and put drainage and infiltration in. It's a disaster. And you got trees that are huge, that are got roots everywhere. It's like, it's just, I
Okay,
mean,
so,
it's not
so
sensible.
which wording are you having problems with?
Well, I'm just voicing my
Yeah,
concerns for the
no.
concept. I mean, I would do just for new projects.
So as it's worded
As worded.
in this draft.
Yeah, okay.
But I want the board to understand, if someone's going to ground zero, they're going to put
Correct.
in for the
That's
18%.
new.
We understand that,
right?
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
new.
I would hope we will include the words "and maintained."
I did put that in.
That we should maintain.
So in that
Right.
paragraph, one last thing, the beginning of that 17567A1B currently reads, "For a project that will result in a 15 and 20% impervious surface."
For a project that will result in between 15 and 20% impervious coverage.
Mine doesn't
Between
say that.
Snodquak-
No, but we
between-
No, I'm fixing it
Oh, okay.
in response to your comment.
Thank you.
I would
Fixing it out
put,
loud.
I would include the words "on a lot."
Where else would they be,
On
Roger?
a lot. It's.
Impervious
that's-
coverage on a
Yeah.
lot? Is that what you're
A
saying?
project on a lot that will result in between 15 and 20% impervious coverage.
What else is there?
I think that's
Roads.
implied because the name
Yeah.
of the section
There's
is
nothing
shorefront
but a
lot
lot.
improvement.
Right.
There are just lots. We have nothing else.
I don't know what else it could refer to. Other
Well,
than a
if
lot.
you add a lot, I would suggest adding that throughout. So on the next one, for a project on a lot where impervious coverage.
It's always on a lot.
I don't know what else it would be on.
Roger, do you think there's some other way it could be interpreted without using the word on a lot?
It can be some vague project. Maybe it includes multiple lots.
Well, if it includes multiple lots, each lot would avail itself of 30%.
Right. Unless they merged it.
It's still the same square footage, though.
Yeah, I don't think it's necessary to include on a lot in paragraph B.
Can I jump to C? Did we agree?
I don't know.
Yeah, I have the same objection to C, but
C, I would get rid of which will, where.
Yeah, right.
For a
For a
project,
project where impervious cover will, blah, blah, blah.
that'll
Per
become
sentence.
impervious coverage.
Where?
for a project will result in coverage of 20%, or of, which will exceed 20%. Well, it keeps changing. It's hard because people keep changing
Right.
the words. So if the previous paragraph is between 15 and 20, this paragraph needs to say for a project which will result in impervious coverage in excess of 20%.
Right.
Yes, certainly,
Right.
Continue.
the wording should
Yep.
be consistent between
Yeah.
the two.
Correct.
In excess.
Never
And
mind,
then
or more.
with that also comes the grid planting,
Which was already in there.
which was already in there. I just added the word additionally.
Okay, so on to D, I guess.
I would suggest that, in keeping with the earlier discussion, that the second sentence be deleted, and the first sentence simply read, where a project results in a decrease or no change in impervious coverage, it shall not be required to provide a professionally engineered stormwater management plan. That's basically what the second sentence says, except that if you read this literally, if you make no change, you don't have to produce a plan, but if you decrease it by 4%, you do have to produce a plan, which doesn't seem logical. So I would simply keep the first sentence and add decrease.
No,
You
at
you lost me,
least.
Roger. So if there's no change, you don't have to do,
As long as there's a decrease.
I think Roger's suggesting that it's read that if there is no change or a decrease.
Yes. So, I mean, if you're
That
not.
makes
gonna-
sense,
if
where
you're
there's
not
no
gonna
change
make
or
them
a
produce
decrease.
it for no change, why would you make them produce
Yeah,
it for a decrease?
well, because there are projects, well, the distinction is simple. If the way it was currently been imposed, if you raise everything that's already there and you build back to the same impervious, you don't have to do a plan. If we want to move from that and hold what we were talking about earlier, you know, if you're going from 16 to 18, you may not need an engineer involved, and you only calculate the delta for coverage. So in this case, where there's no change or a decrease of 5%, you don't have to do the plan. My hangup with this whole paragraph is the term stormwater management plan, where this board spent a lot of time trying to remove the cross-pollination between the site plan regulations and stormwater management plans and this paragraph, because it was not the intent to require stormwater management plans in shorefront residential.
Well, then maybe we should look at C as well. That requires a stormwater management plan.
Correct.
And do we want that to say that?
So I think the change to a stormwater control plan would be fine. And both paragraphs.
Why?
Because if you read stormwater management plan and you then Google the regulations or search the regulations, stormwater management plan pops up under site plan review.
So do we
Which is
need a
not the-
definition for that?
that?
Stormwater, do we need a definition for stormwater control plan?
No, they know what that means.
Okay.
Okay, so change that to control. Okay.
So you, Roger, were you suggesting getting rid of the second sentence in the draft D, where a project will result in a decrease of at least 5%?
Yes, I mean, I don't understand why, if you make it better, you should have to produce a plan, but if you do nothing,
Oh, no.
you should.
Because the current language says if you decrease by 1%, you don't have to do a plan. I was suggesting changing that from 1% to 5% to remove the plan requirement. But if we're doing it no change or a decrease in impervious coverage, no stormwater control plan will be required. That's much cleaner.
I mean, I'm happy to,
Well, also, we need to distinguish between a stormwater management plan, which is the first sentence, and stormwater control measures, which is the second sentence.
but we've changed that, I think.
Yeah.
We changed that.
we
Oh, okay, I'm
changed it.
sorry,
Yeah.
I didn't catch that.
Stormwater management plan shall henceforth in this regulation be a stormwater control plan.
Okay,
And then the next paragraph down, all proposed stormwater control plans or
Right.
control systems. How about all proposed stormwater control measures?
yeah, that should be
Okay,
fine. A plan
right.
is part of the measures, sure.
The whole point of that last paragraph is to get away from photographs. Code officer sees it or third party sees it.
So this is the, my point with the photographs. Photographs you can always go back to. Even if you send the inspector out, you should have something in the record so that in 3 to 5 years down the line, there's something there that you can look at and say, this is what was done. If you're just going out there for verification.
And that's actually what happens, but the way it's worded, people have just been submitting photos. You
Yeah,
know,
but-
well, today we're going to pave the driveway, so hurry up, somebody take a picture of the porous paver construction, finish it up, pave it, and then submit a photo. Believe it or not, all porous driveways look eerily similar, and you don't know if they're showing you a picture from the last job or the current job.
So are you saying that when the code officer goes out to inspect this, he's actually taking photographs at the same time?
Or they
Date
have
timestamps?
photographs to document it, yes.
And that goes in the file?
Yes.
Then on-site inspection and photographs by the code enforcement.
I don't know if it's critical to have photographs in the file, but I think the inspector should have some leeway as to what's going to be used to verify that it was inspected.
Well, if you have the photographs in the file, then 3 to 5 years down the line, you can look back and say, oh, they added the 15 by 15 shed, plus they added the other patio over there. So you actually, what you tried to do in the start of the document was get people to say, okay, if I build this, I have to go to see Tavis. And some people don't think that they need to go see Tavis, and they're just going to do a little bit every year, and then when they get the pictures, then they say, oh, well, I guess I can't do that because they got the pictures. So I mean, it just makes
That
sense.
particular paragraph is only talking about how somebody built a stormwater control measure. That's not site photos documenting, how far the pavers went or how big
Yeah.
the shed was. That's all documented in the plan
I'm
anyway.
just
I
thinking
know.
it's a really good idea that
When you
once you
take a
cover something
picture
up.
this way and you've got all the other periphery stuff that's in the background, it kind of falls into the photograph and you can look back. I mean, say what you want.
Yeah, but what really helps though is, once it's covered up, and 5 years later, you got to dig it up. And you kind of know where and when.
This is going to perhaps
you know?
sound more sarcastic than I mean it.
Yeah,
We also do not take photos after the electrical is installed in the home to document that that's where the wires are, or the plumbing, or the insulation,
no, that's the homeowner's
or
job.
the sheetrock. No. That's what the inspector's for. The inspector's there to verify it. So the point of making the change, or recommending the change here, is to not have the contractor simply take a photo of the one they did right and turn it in on everything. The inspector has to see it.
Okay,
That's the intent of this. For the same reason, you have an electrical inspection, a plumbing inspection, a framing inspection, a roof,
So I think I raised the concern last time when somebody's got a hole open and they're doing something, and there might be a shower coming or something, and they want to take a photograph. So is there any leeway there for anybody where, you're out on the site out there, you're trying to get stuff done, and you just can't sit around and wait for an inspector to get there if you got to get this thing buttoned up because you're going to do more environmental damage if something washes away?
People are always allowed to stabilize a site if they don't have time to make an inspection. What's then told to them is they have to open it back up again. And because people don't want to dig the hole twice, plan ahead. The same reason people are made to remove footings that were done without inspections. The same reason that people have to plan ahead.
okay, so can we keep it with the on-site inspection?
I think so.
Yes,
And there are many people in town that are perfectly willing to have an engineer come out and say, yep, I saw it, that was done correctly, so they can move on.
I would suggest we capitalize the E in enforcement.
Yes. Next one down, all newly generated stormwater shall be managed on the development site. I think it goes without saying, but it never hurts to repeat it.
What numbers are we on?
That was in draft, it was F. It's now, I don't know what it is anymore because G became
Yeah,
A,
yeah.
but we'll figure
Yeah.
that out.
So it stays F.
Stays F, perfect.
Right.
G went away. and the
H becomes G.
H becomes G.
I becomes H.
Correct. I did have an opportunity to speak with planning board attorney. This language on the 5-year inspection report really, I'm thinking in the future, the board might want to think about who prepares that report. Because as it's written, speaking of the letter from your mother, yep, I did it, technically complies. And every 5 years, they can say, yep, I did it, and that complies.
Well, I think last time we talked about this, I asked you if you were going to have a book in the planning office, or you're going to have something that popped up on the screen that said, oh, your 5 years is up, you need to come in and give us a report, and then you're going to have that report in your file, and if somebody comes in, they says, did you do the check? And you can say, yeah, it's right here in the report.
Yes, my point is the report simply is a letter saying, yes, I maintained my system, signed, done.
Yeah, and I think part of the discussion we had previously was that it's, I think, unrealistic to have somebody who's going to, 10 years from now or whoever, whenever it is, do the rounds of the town to go and inspect these individually.
That's not what's going to happen.
No, I understand.
Functionally, it's going to turn in, hey, when's the last time we got one of these reports?
Right.
How many permits were issued? Send a letter to everybody that didn't turn in a report.
Yes.
Yeah.
The hard part is just because they either did or did not submit a report doesn't mean the system is or is not working.
But if you have it the way it's written here, at least,
The onus is on them to
yes, the
track.
lot owner is
Correct.
aware at least that they need to do something. And if they send in a letter every 5 years saying, I swear on my mother that I did it, at least you know they're aware they need to do it.
However, this has no more teeth than them submitting a plan. So when people install these plans, or when the people develop these plans for approval, it says, this is the system, this is the maintenance schedule, and it's written on the plan. It's just as enforceable with what they turn in now as what this will do.
I don't agree with that policy. Again, what you should have is you should have one person who represents the town. The applicant, they should pay this person from the town, and he goes and looks at all of them, so he knows exactly what he's seeing on every one. And if one's different, he'll know right away what's going on. It's different. But if you leave it up to everybody to do their own little thing, you're going to get 200 different evaluations. But
That's what this says. That's what I'm saying.
it has to be town-based and not, you're handing it over to the applicant to say, we're not going to do that. And that's, again,
I'm not. I'm trying to let the board know that that's what this is saying.
Yeah.
The violation here is not turning in a letter. It's not whether the system works or not.
I'm talking about the process, though. The process should be more fluent, and it should be real. It shouldn't be hokey-pokey.
Well, what happens when, that house has sold 2 or 3 times before that new report is due?
Well,
So
perfect.
last
because-
guy in line is not going to know that a report is due.
He'll know because the person that the town has contracted is going around and looking at all these things, and he's going to know if it's the third owner or the fifth owner. It doesn't matter at that point because the town is in line with something.
I think the difference here is that what's written here is a homeowner-driven process, and John is proposing a town-driven process.
Right.
I think it should be, the inspection should be done by whoever installed it or by somebody who is qualified to install one. So you get away from the note from your mother and get somebody who,
Okay, but that again is different from what was originally discussed. So you work this all the way through with me, whether the town says the report was in or the town doesn't. If this is challenged, Roger didn't turn in his report, it's been 10 years. We go to court and we fine Roger for not turning in a report. It's completely detached from the element itself. So if the goal is to require annual, biannual, triannual inspections by a licensed engineer, we need a different paragraph, whether it's a town person or someone else. The only violation someone does by not turning in a report is not turning in the report. It's completely irrespective of what the report is supposed to represent.
But
I think you raise a good point.
as part of that report is the effectiveness of the system that's there and the integrity of the system, because if you just let things go like the inn on North Main up there that had all their stuff, and I remember Rob saying, Kathy says, well, who's going to inspect this stuff? And Rob says, well, I will. And so, I mean, that was a program that was supposed to happen years ago, and it didn't turn out that way. So here we are again, and we're discussing it. So we need to get it real. It's not real if you just let a homeowner do it.
But I don't think you can tell a future homeowner that doesn't exist yet that they're going to have to hire somebody that did something 10 years ago.
Well, you
To do something
can't, you
else.
can't, we can do that right now. If somebody turned in a permit in 2018, and that plan on the plan sheet shows a bioinfiltration system over here, and it says on there it has to be maintained all these times, and there's a big storm and all the water goes straight across this property, we can call the question, this was supposed to be installed. Is it still in operation? Because this plan that your previous property owner agreed to said this would be maintained every year and a half. I don't need this paragraph to do that. So this is adding language that really doesn't do anything other than perhaps remind somebody that's filling out the application they have to get a note from mom every 5 years.
They're only going to look at that if they're going to do something new anyway.
And if they hire someone, the person that said that goes, that's on them. And they will put a note right on the plan, town reporting to be responsibility of property owner. But again, the only violation of this ordinance is I didn't get a piece of paper
Report.
that says it's there. I don't disagree with where you're going, John, but this doesn't say that.
So in reality, what happens is nothing happens until there's a problem. So once there's a problem, we have to show that there's some kind of recourse.
And that is on the, I mean, that's part and parcel, pardon the pun, of a building permit. If you said you were going to use A, B, C, and D, when the inspector was there, it was all there, and sometime later you modified C and D, that's on you.
So we don't need this.
I don't think so.
I just don't think it's-
understand the intent behind this, but this isn't saying what,
But the normal behavior is until something goes wrong, nothing happens.
No,
I
and
mean,
then you've already compromised your integrity, and the next homeowner that wants to take this gem house over, he's got a system that's in failure, but he really doesn't know it because nobody's been looking at on what's been going on. I don't have a problem with a contractor that the town feels comfortable with doing all the inspections.
what are they going to see?
They're gonna look at the areas where the infiltration of the water's supposed to go in. They're gonna tell if it's all covered over with 3 inches of mulch. They're gonna be able to look at all these areas and say, your sump pan is filled with sediment and it's up over the pipes that go into the infiltration area. I mean, it's pretty basic.
Well, John, will the inspector, let's assume for the moment that the town has somebody on staff that's going to go around and perform these inspections. Do they have the legal right to enter somebody's property to
No.
do that?
But
Even a complaint doesn't get you on their property. If there's no building permit, you don't get on that property.
So we shouldn't have wording in here that says that they need to do an inspection every 5 years or give a note back to the town.
Careful. It doesn't say you have to do an inspection. It says you have to write a letter saying you did maintenance.
Okay, so it's even worse than that.
Brad, where do you come down on this?
I think having it the way it's written here puts it onto the owner to, submit every 5 years a report that they've been maintaining it. It takes the town out of the liability if there is an issue, there's a problem with it damaging the neighbor's property or wherever this runoff would go or and anything there. I think if you put the requirement that they have a inspector come in and do it and put the cost onto the homeowner, that's doing, we've talked over, the years I've been on this here now of not putting undue burden, cost burdens onto these property owners to make them more expensive every time they turn around. And I don't think the town would support having it be a staff member being paid to go out and just do all these inspections and stuff. We're kind of understaffed now, put it that way, to get the amount of work done that this town needs to have done. And with the budgets and everything, I don't see that happening, so, to be realistic on that end of it, so.
I mean, Wolfeboro residents are generally accommodating. Dear Mr. So-and-so, it's come to our attention that, your storm drain is clogged, we'll put it that way. Oh, let me go look at that. And then, hey, would you mind if I come look at it? I'm more concerned when somebody has an intricate infiltration system. Maybe there's leaves on top of it, that's going to impede it somewhat, but if the whole column is full of sand, I don't care what inspector you go out there, they're not going to dig it up and then, do a pressure test to see if the airspace is appropriate for a system of a certain age. But this paragraph definitely doesn't get anywhere close to either of those scenarios.
The one thing it would do, though, is remind a homeowner that every
That they
5
have a
years
system.
he's supposed to do something, and you could just delete the last sentence.
But when is the
And if we go
homeowner,
on the
act-
theory that most of the people in Wolfeboro will make an
You
effort,
could do that, yeah.
but Roger, when is a homeowner going to read this unless they're coming in for a permit?
Well, if they ever look at their plans, they'll see that they're supposed to do that.
Right, they might see it on their plans, but what I'm saying is, having that here in this document, you're not going, to unless you're coming in for a specific thing for, the shoreline, you're not even going to read it.
And it is on the maintenance plan that's on the document that
Right.
you submit
Yeah.
already.
I
You
don't
would
think,
hope that if you got that kind of a system and you've got this immense home, that you would get like the notebook at closing of how all your stuff works, and that would be one of the notebooks that you'd get, that you'd hand off to your handyman guy to make work.
But if
So I can
they
see this
got,
is like way far down the line, like this is just extra stuff in here that's just kind of taking up space.
So if you had in the planner's notes that they required that a subcontractor that does inspections should inspect it and then give the note from their mother to the town, nobody would be approving of that? You just want to
I mean,
let-
if this were to get adopted like this, I would have to create a system where each shorefront residential property that received a CO went on a mailing list with a date, and there would be a form letter. Please recall you have stormwater control measures on your property subject to a 5-year review. No review has been received since blank. Submit your review. But I then have to be very careful when they call and say, well, what has to be in that review? I can only give them this paragraph. I'm not going to say you need to go hire a third-party contractor to verify, because that's not what this says.
We could say something like, all stormwater control measure plans have an implementation and maintenance schedule that must be followed, period. It's not on us.
You could say that. That's on the plans already.
I know, but if we need to put something in here, I don't think we do, but if we need to.
I don't think we really need it. This is talking about other things.
It's on the plans.
And it should actually be in that initial reporting stuff that
The plan,
that you would
the-
get when your system got put in. I'm sure it would say, we recommend you to have, inspections this many times, call us at this phone number, because the people that put it in are going to want the turnaround there. Please keep using us, and we'll, do your reports for you as has been required.
Okay, can we just take out the last sentence, like Roger just suggested, and go with this? I mean, I agree.
Yeah, I mean, the last sentence is going to apply, whether it's
Right.
written or not, but
Yeah,
I think Kathy's suggestion is fine.
I'm good with that.
I obviously agree.
I didn't have any other changes on the remainder of page 4.
I have two things. One is that RSA 485A39 does not state what is here.
What-
It's slightly different.
What letter are we on?
5,
Five.
Number
page 4, number 5.
5, okay.
Well, that's what the ordinance currently says. I
Yeah.
don't have a problem changing it, but that's why it wasn't addressed.
We should fix the reference. What is the correct
Prior to
reference?
the execution of a purchase and sale agreement for any developed waterfront property using a septic disposal system, the owner of the property shall, at the owner's expense, engage a permitted subsurface sewer waste disposal system designer to perform a site assessment study. And so basically,
Does
any
5,
seller of any developed waterfront property using a septic disposal system, then a site assessment study is required.
So that sounds to me what
It-
RSA 45A39 says, in longer terms.
would it be easier in 5 to say, all projects shall comply with RSA 485A:39 as amended? Instead of trying to currently update the regs to,
All, say, well, when selling developed property, a seller of any developed waterfront property using a site septic disposal system shall, requires a site assessment study.
My question was, do the town regs need to restate state regs?
And I would say no. I think if you just make reference to it, so people
Right.
are aware they have to comply, is not necessarily to rewrite it in this document.
So my suggestion would be all projects shall, well, again, that is true whether they're getting a shorefront residential permit or not.
Yeah, always.
So it's just,
Right.
all SFR property shall comply with RSA 485A39. All SFR property shall comply with RSA 485A17.
Yeah, actually, it's RSA 483B9, Roman numeral 5D, that requires an alteration of terrain permit pursuant to RSA 485A17.
So the question, do 5 and 6 need to be in the shorefront residential regulations? Because we also don't state all the other state regulations for shorefront properties.
I would say if they're redundant, they don't need to be there.
Right.
So is that a suggestion to remove 5 and 6?
It is.
Now, having them in there does serve as a reminder, particularly in the case of a site assessment, but I think almost every realtor will tell you you need a site assessment.
But we're talking about shorefront lot improvement standards, not selling your house.
Correct.
So I don't think it needs to be in there.
They are done regularly. I get questions and phone calls all the time about site assessments, so just if that helps with the peace of mind of the board. The realtors and engineers seem to be well aware of.
Even without this current regulation, they're well aware of it. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah.
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 These regulations are never picked up unless someone is proposing to do something. In which case they may or may not have to comply with those sections anyway.
Okay, can we go ahead and delete that then?
That's what I suggested,
Yeah,
yes.
right, that's what I was,
5 and 6?
Correct.
I still have no changes through 4. Next change is the recommended language in, oh, good heavens, I'll just use, on page 5, little d. This is a revision that John and Doug worked on, although I did take the word sapling out.
Well, if you look at this, the zoning ordinance defines trees as being 3 or 3.5 inches, basically, in diameter. So that would not, they would not count on scoring if you took out sapling.
I took out sapling because I thought you suggested it.
I didn't suggest it, but it was suggested. Which leaves an interesting,
So any tree species sub 3 inches is a bush.
no, it's a sapling, and actually we define shrubs differently than the state defines shrubs.
But
So
isn't
do we
the
want to put
sapling
saplings back in?
I'm sorry, Roger, do you know offhand what the definition of sapling is?
Isn't it a tree?
It grows to, it will eventually be over 20 feet, I believe.
So it's a tree.
But it's,
But it's,
But it doesn't get
It's a
points under
baby
3
tree.
inches.
and
baby tree.
it's,
Well, is a fawn a deer? I
But it
think
wasn't,
is.
Doug's.
All fawns are deer, but not all
fawns are
deer are
deer.
fawns.
Aren't all saplings trees, is what I'm asking.
I think the word is, regardless of the tree sapling definition, if the tree definition doesn't include sub 3 inch diameter stems, then you don't count for the point score, which is all we're achieving.
And you have to understand what the sentence is and how it's worded properly, because the idea that existing tree diameter shall be measured at 4.5 feet above the ground, that's the tree that's out there already. And new plantings shall be measured by caliper. That's the new one that you get at the nursery, and they're not measuring saplings, they're measuring by a caliper. So that's why that wording was specific there. The word sapling doesn't do anything for the discussion.
Well, no, I think, John, the point is that you could have existing plantings that are saplings.
They're still
Yes,
trees.
but if
So
it's,
No, not by our definition. If they're under
175 tree, oh, sorry, 175, 175 terms and word usage. Tree is any self-supporting, woody perennial plant which has a trunk diameter of 3 or 3.5 inches caliper.
but we're not using that context, okay? And that's the problem. The context is an existing tree is measured at 4.5 feet above the ground, and you just said at the trunk, and that's not what we're doing.
I didn't say at the trunk. Any self-supporting woody perennial plant which has a trunk diameter of 3.5 inches caliper.
That's at the
So by
bottom.
definition,
No, it doesn't say at the bottom.
by our
It says the
own-
trunk diameter, it doesn't say where.
At the caliper. Well, the caliper's measured at the bottom.
But he never used the word caliper.
He did.
yeah, a trunk diameter of 3 or 3.5 inches caliper.
Oh, caliper, I'm sorry, I missed that.
That's
Well,
what the problem.
the problem I have with this definition is you could have a redwood that would not be a tree by our definition. Because by this definition, it has to have a diameter of 3 or 3.5 inches. 20 inches is not a tree.
Right.
Well, the discussion came because we were measuring the tree at 4.5 feet. So we had to just say, okay, if we're going to be consistent, then it has to be measured at 4.5 feet across the board. And when you measure a new sapling from the nursery, which is the standard, that gets measured at the caliper at the bottom.
Right. No, that's why John and I distinguish between existing and new planting measurement methods.
So the way I look at this, as it's drafted here, for existing stems on the property, measured at 4.5 feet, that's what you use to determine how many points you currently have.
That's the state standard, yes.
And then later, it talks about what you must plant to, measured, I just put the same paragraph in later.
But the industry standard, when you buy those from the nursery, is measured at the bottom. It's
Correct.
not measured up 4.5 feet.
Correct. Well, a new plant would also not be an existing tree diameter.
Correct.
But the discussion
However-
we started with was about the word sapling, not about how high you're measuring the item.
Right. But by the town's definition of tree, it doesn't say where to measure, it just says trunk diameter of 3 or 3.5 inches. But the shorefront says you measure at 4.5 feet. So if you have a tree that is
So if you have a
3 or
sapling,
3.5 inches at 4.5 feet, it counts, and if it's narrower than that, it doesn't.
if you have a sapling that's like 1 inches around and up at 4.5 feet, it's at 3/4 or a half an inch.
It gets 1 point.
Does it get a point?
It says so on this chart.
Yeah.
Yeah, diameter and caliper, 1 to 3 gets a score of 1.
No, but
3/4 would
I
not
think what
count.
John just said, though, correct me if I'm wrong, John, is that you have an existing, I'll call it a tree, and it's 5 feet tall, and it might be an inch diameter at the base, but it's only 3/4 inch diameter at 4.5 feet.
Doesn't give you any points.
It's
It
a
does not
point.
give you any points. That was what I was getting at, yes.
That's right. It's a
But if you
zero.
read it technically, if it's 2 inches in diameter, it doesn't give you a point either because it's not a
We thought
tree.
about this.
Right, but neither is one that's 40 inches.
Good now.
No, hold on. So, Roger, you're saying that a sapling is not a tree, is that right?
No, I'm saying under our zoning ordinance, saplings don't exist.
Correct.
Right, only trees.
3
So-
inches or more
But
in
the
diameter.
same, it doesn't say that. It says 3 or 3.5 inches, so every giant tree is also not a tree. Our zoning definitions, I'm not saying that was the intent, but what it literally says is a tree is either 3 or 3.5 inches.
And that's in our definitions.
Yes,
Well, that's just messed up.
yes.
Okay, so I think that's a separate problem to address from what we have
Correct.
here.
A different
Yeah.
day.
I will tell you, I have yet to see a design or engineering professional have such trouble with how to implement this section as the board is. Because if you don't, they're trying to hit 50 points. They're not going to measure something that's a half inch and try and figure out if they have 50 of them.
Right.
Right.
Well, now it's 25 points.
E-
I know.
Either way.
So I just want to make sure that I'm on track. Roger, is your objection to having sapling removed from this language?
It's inconsistent with the state, is what I'm hearing.
Yes.
Oh, okay. Thank you.
I think we should just agree all saplings are trees. They just may or may not count.
Yeah, right.
So for purpose of this section, all tree species are trees. However, only existing tree diameter with this point schedule gives you something to calculate.
Yeah.
Count.
That's what's done,
Yeah.
with or
And I
without the
think
word sapling in there.
Right,
I'm satisfied with the way it's worded in this latest revision.
right.
Yeah, I am.
And then it
too.
says the
it's
same
much
thing
better.
later on the page under number 2. Same thing, I took out, I left and sapling, just in case we went back to it, but we could remove sapling.
Cross that baby out.
And then I'm at the bottom of page 6.
Well, can I go back to
Missed all of bottom of
C
page 5.
or E? Under the state statute, shrubs qualify for 1 point. 4 square feet of shrub gets 1 point. Ground cover gets 1 point for 50 square feet.
So we need an E2 to break out ground cover.
Yes. And actually, the state says ground cover excluding lawns.
Ground cover excluding lawns of at least, is it 50 contiguous square feet?
It's,
No, you can have patches, different areas of the ground cover. The ground cover could be here, it could be over there. I mean, chances are ground cover all being one big mass is probably pretty rare.
Wait, and why are we going from 4 square feet to, would you
No,
say 50?
4 square feet of shrub is 1 point.
Yeah,
what it
Or
reads,
ground cover excluding lawns of at least 50 square feet
50.
is 1 point.
Oh.
between shrubs and ground cover.
Right.
But you still get a point for every 4 square feet.
Yes.
of ground cover, not for every 4 square feet of,
Shrubs.
no, shrubs you get 4 feet, ground cover takes 50 square feet.
No, I don't,
The
that's what the
statute
statute
reads,
says.
for the purpose of replanting under shrubs and ground cover plants shall be scored as follows. 4 square feet of shrub area, 1 point. Ground cover not including mowed lawn, 1 point for every 50 square feet. And then there's a limit on how much you can count shrubs and ground cover, but
Oh, come on, somebody say it.
well, we have to
Is
comply
that
with that
surface
anyway.
area at the top or basal area of impact?
4.5 feet.
I'm not, you know the variety of plants that are out there. You can get some monster grasses as ground cover that aren't lawn, that literally take
A pot this big.
6 square inches, it's going to cover 50 square feet.
So generally, what's going to happen is the architect's going to look at the thing as a big piece of paper, and then he's going to take out the bush, and then he's going to, first he's going to do a total calculation, take out the bush and whatever's left, and that's how he's going to come up with it. So,
So is everybody
6.
okay with the way it is now?
No.
Okay, but everyone else?
Yes.
Are we putting in the 50 square feet?
Yes, with Roger's change
I'm
of
fine
50
with that
square
then.
feet.
Yeah, what I
Yeah.
heard is that E1 is going, so shrubs and ground cover shall be scored as follows. 1, 4 square feet of shrub, 1 point. Ground cover excluding grass of at least 50 square feet, 1 point.
Yes.
Yep.
Right.
The words "and sapling" come out of C2 to be consistent with the above, lest we go through that discussion again. And then we're on to page 6. Top of page 6, I put the words in instead of the carrots or the alligators again. 3 is the footpath discussion. No vegetation shall be removed except for footpaths that provide access to docks, beaches, and structures not to exceed 6 feet in width, and that do not concentrate stormwater. I don't know what footpath wouldn't concentrate stormwater, but I think this is an intent question more than a word game.
Well, it's always going to be the low area, and people are going to, unless they build it up, but that usually isn't what happens. It's the lowest spot because it always gets beat down by traffic, and then the water follows it down, and then it dumps right into the lake from that point, so.
And the last 3 that I've seen that include a footpath have been, the designer has been receptive to putting, if they have the opportunity for a switchback or a curve, they're willing to put larger rocks or infiltration or something just to try and, anyway. 4, no changes to my recollection. 5, first sentence, and sapling comes out to be consistent with the previous page and discussion. More significant change in 6, dead, terminally diseased, or structurally unsafe trees, shrubs, and ground cover shall not be included in scoring and may be removed upon written verification of condition determination comes out by the town tree warden or their designee.
Did we run that by the tree warden already?
No.
Well, we probably better before this goes to a public hearing.
That is one of the functions of a tree warden, so I will get that communication and process. If the tree warden says, no, I don't want to do that, someone will have to come up with a designee for this to hold. Keep in mind, this is only dealing with trees within 50 feet. This is not all trees on the property. This is just within 50 feet. 7 remains unchanged. 8, the last sentence became the first, to now read, no fertilizer may be used within 25 feet.
So 7 and 8, those are both redundant in the state's statute. I don't know why we are putting them in our zoning ordinance.
I
Well,
agree.
these
but-
were put in when we did the thing back in 2012.
Okay,
Maybe it's time for them to come out.
Yeah, but this is the same as in the earlier reference, they're redundant. Perhaps they're not needed.
Well, I think you can't tell people too many times that they shouldn't do this. And this does make it clear that if they are doing it, they can be cited for it.
so what is the town going to do if somebody fertilizes within 25 feet of the reference line?
Well, I think that's an enforcement issue, which isn't part of this discussion.
Well, that's what
I
I'm,
can tell you what happens, because I called up the codes officer, a former codes officer, to report someone in the condominium across Back Bay who was spreading fertilizer next to Back Bay. And someone went down and talked to him.
okay, so let me throw this one at you. So say I have a house and I go out there and I get on my hands and knees and I get my flat shovel and I skin up all the old sod and I get rid of the broad weeds. And then I go down to Cameron's and buy some sod and I lay it all out and it's nice and lush and green and somebody says, oh, that's all fertilized. And then they come to my house and so,
The letter reads something akin to, it has come to our attention that fertilizer may have been installed in violation of section blah, 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 blah. Would you please set up a time to meet with us so we can discuss this? The town does not have the arsenal to go determine whether low phosphorus fertilizer was or was not used.
no, they don't. That's what I'm saying. So if
But-
we're putting in a law that we can't enforce, maybe we shouldn't have it in there because the state's already got it in theirs.
The state's
Well,
not
what's the matter
enforcing
with
that.
saying it again? I mean, it's an important issue.
We can't enforce it.
Sure we can.
We can enforce it because the second letter says your failure to respond, leaves us no choice but to reach out to you again, and then you copy DES with it. Is it likely to go anywhere? Probably not. But once people start getting letters from the town, they start going, hey, Mr. Applicator, can you comply with this? I don't like getting these letters.
And I've not seen landscaper in question fertilizing next to Back Bay since my telephone call.
But the real question is this the proper place to put it?
Yes,
Yes, I think so.
you know, unless we just want to throw everything out and say, hey, we'll let the state do it, doesn't matter. Let's see if we can't degrade our water quality some more.
I don't know if that whole thing was the intent of
Okay,
that
is
comment.
this, these staying or going?
I think they should go myself, but
I'm sorry,
don't-
John, what was that?
I think they should go, both of them, 7 and 8.
So I've heard a couple of stays and a couple of goes. Do we want to?
I don't think it belongs in this space.
I
that we're
make a
talking
motion
about.
that we remove number 7 and number 8.
I'll second that.
Okay, motion has been made and seconded to remove 7 and 8 from the proposed ordinance. Everyone in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
Opposed?
I just like to remind everybody, when we started with this shorefront language, we had the state language already, and we decided to do different things from more stringent things than the state was doing, and that's what made this regulation. So if we're not saying anything more stringent, it's the state regulation. Like, why say it over? I know Roger likes to, but I
More and
wouldn't.
bigger and better is not necessarily better.
Right.
Well, my,
Okay, well, that motion did not pass.
Are you sure?
I think it did.
It did, it did.
It did? Okay.
I was just trying to provide.
Okay, well,
Well,
let's
but-
try it again.
Can you do a roll call, Kathy?
Yeah, right, okay. Julie?
Yes.
Okay, Brad?
No.
John?
Yes.
I'll say no.
I'll say no.
No.
Yes.
So 3 to 4, 7 and 8 stay.
So we're keeping it.
Yes.
Yes.
However, we are saying as 8 is written, which is a change from the current. Puts the no fertilizer within 25 feet and then low phosphorus between,
That's correct.
okay.
Now you're at the very bottom of page 6.
Yep.
Yep,
So this is for lot redevelopment. So lot redevelopment now says if you do a redevelopment of a non-conforming primary structure exists, you do a plan prepared by a professional engineer or surveyor. That covers that and is consistent with everything else that's discussed this evening. And that's it for the changes.
okay,
So
everyone,
procedurally, if the board is comfortable with this, your next step would be to set a public hearing. What I will do probably tomorrow before this leaves my brain for 4 days is to make these changes and get an updated draft to all the members. The notice will go in the paper timely for the second meeting in December because we've missed the December 5th.
okay, do you need a motion for that, probably?
To set the public hearing, yeah, but what I want to do is to sort of lay it out to see if the board also wants to schedule a separate date, because if I don't have this exactly the way you think it's
Well, but we'll be
going,
meeting before then.
December 5th, correct?
Yeah, right.
But the notice for the next meeting after that will already be in the paper. So we don't have much time.
Well, we've looked at this several times.
I know, and it changed a bit tonight. I just want to
Yeah,
make
no, I
sure
know
that,
that, right. But you went over most of it, the changes. Is that right? Yeah. Is everybody okay if we go ahead with the public hearing, the third Tuesday of December?
The 19th.
Yeah,
Yeah.
thank you.
correct.
I'm going to vote against it, but before we have a vote, do we want to hear from Rich, who's here representing Wolfeboro Waters?
Why?
Why would you want to talk to somebody who brought this to before us? I mean, do we really care about anything?
I think we should
Yeah,
certainly
well,
give
I-
Rich the opportunity to
Yeah.
speak. Whether he wants to or not, I don't know.
Right.
Okay, thank you very much. What I'll start off by saying is I was not looking at the same version of the document that you were. The last one I received was sent to me on October 17th. So there were some changes that you were looking at that I didn't see. That said, I think I was by and large able to follow the discussion. A couple of things I would say I maybe need a little bit of clarification to make sure I heard correctly. There was a provision regarding all newly generated stormwater managed on the development site that was retained, if I remember correctly.
Correct.
Okay,
Yes, it
all right.
was.
Yeah, thank you. Well, I'm going to ask Tavis to read two of the provisions that you worked on tonight, and then I may have a comment on them. And that, the first, this is all in 175-67. First one is an A1B, which is the 15 to 20%. I just want to make sure I understood what changes you're making there.
For a project that will result in between 15 and 20% impervious coverage, at least one stormwater control measure shall be implemented and maintained in the proposed development, which may include, but are not limited to, rain garden, infiltration trenches, pervious driveways, dry wells, among others, comma, of sufficient capacity to infiltrate the increased stormwater generated by the increase in impervious coverage proposed with the project.
Okay, and then could I ask for a reading of the next section, which is, I guess, C?
C, right.
Yeah.
For a project which will result in impervious coverage of 20% or more, a stormwater control plan prepared by a professional engineer must be implemented to infiltrate increased stormwater from the development for square footage exceeding 20%. Additionally, any grid segment within the waterfront buffer that does not meet, I was missing that already, that does not meet the minimum required 25-point tree and sapling score, each deficient grid segment must be planted with additional vegetation to at least achieve the minimum required score.
Okay, thank you. I just want to suggest to you that percentages and professional engineers aside, those two provisions don't say the same thing. They don't treat runoff the same way. I would say that the first one is one that Wolfeboro Waters could endorse, and that is that beyond the percentage doesn't come into play beyond tripping the fact that you need to have some stormwater controls, right? The way it's worded, you need to deal with the full impact, the full runoff from the project. And if we have any question about that, maybe we should have Tavis reread that section. That's what it says.
I see what you're
as I
saying.
understand it.
So if you're at 16% and you result at 22%, C says you treat 2%.
Yeah, I'm looking at B, though. I'm looking
Right.
at B, okay? B says you must deal with the full runoff, the full impact of your project.
No.
It doesn't? Okay.
No.
Maybe you could reread that to me, and,
So toward the end,
yeah.
among others, of sufficient capacity to infiltrate the increased stormwater generated by the increase in impervious coverage proposed with the project. So if-
Increased as determined by what?
If
How would you calculate that
If you
increase?
start at 6, so the way the form works, you have a I'll just call it pre and post. So they write down the house, the driveway, the shed, the garage, the chicken coop, whatever's on the property. At the bottom, there's a total square footage. The proposed project is going to make the house larger or smaller. Maybe there's not a structure listed in the pre that results in the post, and then there's a net square footage over there. Those are then divided by the total area within the 250 to determine the percentage. So if your precondition is 16%, and you do the math and you come up with your proposed and you're at 18%, B says you treat that 2% increase.
What if you're at 13% to begin with, and you end up at 18%?
Then the delta between 13 and 18 is what you catch.
Okay, I agree. That's how I read it, and that makes sense to me. You are dealing with the full impact, the full increase of that project.
Correct.
Okay? That's different than what C says.
Correct.
Why is that?
Well, no, not necessarily. There are very few projects that I've seen in 3 years that someone's at 13% and ends at 25. In that scenario, you would be calculating the 13 to 25 delta, or the increase in stormwater. But the only difference between B and C is that C, you're getting the professional involved.
No, the difference is that with C, let's say you're going from 18 to 24. C says that first 2% or 3%, 18, 19, 20, you deal with under provision A. And you only have to deal with
I see what you're saying.
the rest of it under provision,
It's written differently, but what you wanted to say is how it's been treated, but it says something else. He is right.
Yeah,
So C needs to reflect. So
I would suggest it should use the language of B.
correct. I was just going to say, for a project which will result in impervious coverage in excess of 20% or more, a stormwater control plan prepared by a professional engineer must be implemented to infiltrate the increased stormwater generated by the increase in impervious surface.
Right, I think that would be what we would want. That way we don't have to take out a slide rule when we cross from 20 to 21 and figure out how much of it can be treated under the provisions of of B, and how much of it needs to be treated under the provisions of C.
Correct.
All right, so I think that, I would agree with that. I think that's perfectly on target.
The nice thing is that's what's been happening, but it is written differently when you parse out the word.
Okay, all right, so that's good.
So can we remove sapling on that one, on B, on C?
Tree score.
Tree and sapling score? We
Yep,
don't-
tree score.
But Rich, thank you for that insight. That's valuable.
Yes, thank you.
Okay, sure.
you, Rich.
One quick question, if I may, on the provisions of D. We went over it several times, and I'm not sure how we exactly ended up in terms of no increase or decrease.
So
If I could hear that wording again.
Yep, what I have as a result of tonight is where a project results in no change or a decrease in impervious coverage, it shall not be required to provide a professionally engineered stormwater control plan, period, and stop.
Okay, all right. I think what I expressed before, and I think I would still say the same, and that is that it's hard, in my mind, it's inequitable to allow a project to have absolutely no mitigation, simply because there may have been a certain amount of impervious cover, which is to say a certain amount of impact on the local environment. The fact that we haven't increased it could result in the kind of inequity that I think I described before. And I won't belabor it, but the example I gave was if you're at, let's say, 33, 34%, and you've got a driveway or a parking area, a paved parking area that's, let's say, 1,500 square feet, and you want to build a garage on there, that's going to be 1,000 square feet. You haven't increased the impervious cover, And so the fact that your property is at 33% means it's a significant, it's having a significant impact on the local water. You take somebody else who is at, let's say, 22, 23%, they put in a 1,000 square feet garage. It increases their impervious cover. They're on the hook for the whole deal, the professional engineer and all that kind of stuff. The impact of that property, I think, arguably, is less than the impact of the property that already was at 32, 33%. And so what we're kind of doing is we're saying, if you've been having a significant impact all along, all these years, well, as long as you don't make it any worse, we're going to give you a break. However, somebody who had a lesser impact and increases it by the same construction is now on the hook for all the expense and all the overhead of dealing with that runoff. So again, I won't belabor it, but I just would ask the board to think about that whether you really want to let people off the hook, what should matter is where they are in the threshold. If they're at over 20%, and they don't increase their impervious cover, but they're at 22, 23, 29, why would they get a break when the next door neighbor, who only increased to that area, has to go through the whole mitigation process? The impact of both properties is arguably the same, and I would just ask the board to think about that.
Can I make a comment about that?
What should be done?
So what comes to my mind is when you take you're basically saying somebody's going to tear that house down and start over, but they're going to build right inside the footprint. Is that what you're saying?
Well, no, the example I gave was the garage, but go ahead with that example.
The same. So what comes to my mind is a lot of those older places, they're low, and when you build a new place, you build it up out of the ground, and it's higher, and you can see more, and then what happens is your elevations of grades change because you tip and push water to these different areas. To me, that's the concern. That I understand your point is equitable, but my point is grade change and how you move the water off to another area when you could be doing something because you probably do have the area to do something. So I was more concerned about somebody who had a house, the house was going to stay, you were doing a garage next door, and you wanted to make them do stormwater for the existing building. I'm not for that. Your concept, I would kind of promote, if you did new construction, you swiped it down, I would be a proponent of some better stormwater management.
So
Thank you, Joe.
I heard, for the board's benefit, potentially two different things happening. If somebody's at 33% and that lawfully existed prior to the regulation, that sort of is a grandfathered condition. You know, the reverse of that is all of Center Street having commercial structures on it, and then somebody buys the lot, but they bought it this year and wanted to build commercial because on either side of them is commercial, but they're only allowed residential. That's the flip of this conversation. So I think if the town put in a regulation that said, even though you're at 33%, but because you're going from paved parking area to a structure, a potential legal challenge would be, yes, they changed how the water hit the ground, but not the amount of water that hit the ground, because impervious in is impervious out. And I don't know if that would hold up. But that's slightly different than, 1950s single-story camp turning into somehow the same square footage but taller and pitched differently on the roof. Those are two different animals to a degree. But they would be treated the same if it's square footage in, square footage out.
Okay. All right, thank you very much.
Thank you, Rich.
Okay, thank you.
The only benefit to that is the new structure wouldn't be able to build the same way as the original structure. Because, the original camp probably didn't have a foundation drain. It didn't have any infiltration for stormwater. So that gets even more convoluted than I think the board wants at this point.
Well, you make a good point. So say somebody builds a house in the footprint and then they got a foundation drain. So what are we going to ask them to do? Nothing with a foundation drain, or?
Foundation drain by definition infiltrates water. So that most people that are building today, they don't want storm drain, they're gutters and downspouts that just dump all over the yard. They put it into something because it's unsightly. And that usually is some semblance of a system that would allow infiltration. So even though it's the same square footage and the roof may or may not be pitched a different way or a different direction, they are more likely to be infiltrating water than the original structure that, to Rich's point, never contemplated stormwater being a problem.
In my experience, the state always requires some kind of infiltration trenches along the eaves of new construction,
Correct.
regardless of what we say.
Correct.
So,
And while it's under construction, remember, the whole site is wrapped in silt fence and silt sock, and they're not allowed to remove that until everything's stabilized and effectively back at natural.
So Vaughn, you're saying the state is going to mandate you to put in infiltration trenches?
yep,
Right.
for new construction, new roofs, wherever the drip line occurs.
So the town doesn't even have to get involved in it?
Well, that's true in that.
Where the town does get involved, not to get into too many specifics, but where somebody needs to pick up that increase of 2% or 3%, that's usually done by making that required trench bigger.
Okay, so there you go, Rich. If the state's going to mandate you to put in infiltration trenches so you
Well,
do have coverage,
State requires the infiltration trench. If something is then triggered by paragraph B or C, that's usually by making that trench bigger, which would then make it subject to the 5-year reporting and all of that stuff.
so there is a safety net.
Okay, all right, so we're pretty much set. You're
So
gonna try and get
19th,
this
7
to us?
o'clock, and I'll get a revision out ASAP.
Oh, okay. All right.
But you didn't vote yet
Well, we don't really need to.
to set a public hearing?
Yeah,
Yes.
I mean, we can if you, okay, I'll, you want to make a motion?
Sure, I'll make a
to-
motion to hold a public hearing on the proposed shorefront regulations on December 19th,
Yes.
December 19th,
Okay,
2023,
7 PM.
okay, with the corrections made by Chad.
with the
Yes,
corrections.
that will be the draft available,
Right,
yes.
okay, all right, I'll second that. All in favor, please say aye. Aye. Opposed? Okay. All right,
One opposed.
okay, all right. One opposed. Okay,
We heard Roger's we heard Rich's comments though, Roger.
It might be something else he decided to vote no for.
Okay.
Well, actually, if there had been an opportunity for a little discussion, I think for purposes of getting this before the public at a public hearing, I would support scheduling the public hearing.
okay, so you're.
So
you're-
you can count me as an
Okay.
affirmative vote.
All right, thank you. Okay, so that's everyone then, unanimous.
And you can schedule another one. If there's public comment and there's a change that comes out of that, we
Yeah.
still have plenty of time in the schedule for another hearing.
Right. Okay, all right, on to housing. We had a meeting on October 17th. I think we need to hear from all of you what you heard from the public and what you think we should do. I've already put several housing studies on the planning board website so that if people are interested, the public or anyone They're 2023 studies. And also, at the last meeting, I told her I'd started to work on some housing information, sort of definitions, and just some things that came up that I think needed maybe a little bit more, information from us as to what they mean. So that was what that was. And, so that, I mean, I really want to hear from people about whether they want this or not. So, and also, when I went to the, and Tavis was there today, to the Economic Development Committee. They have a date for a housing forum. That's April 24th in 2024. And they'd like us to be part of that discussion. So, I said, well, yes, I would work with the person who's doing it. And, I would hope that some of the planning board members would attend. And basically, I mean, what I got out of the public hearing was a lot of information on short-term rentals and concerns voiced by people, plus some of the other things that, I think we just have to do a better job of defining some of these, if we go forward with some of our proposals. So can we start, Vaughn? You have any thoughts on?
Well, I keep seeing in all the information that keeps getting sent to us from different towns that are doing things is that they have definitions of short-term rentals. And so I think that, again, we should propose a definition of short-term rentals so that we can deal with the problem. Whether our wording is not as good as Alton's or somebody else's, we can work on our wording, but I think it's clear from that forum that there were a lot of people who thought we should define short-term rentals so that we can deal with them.
Okay. All right, did you have anything to add to the housing information?
No, I mean, I think that is super helpful because there were a lot of questions, that I think a handout at the next meeting would be good because these things are defined by others.
Right.
And it's not as if we're creating these affordable housing, workforce housing, but, and I don't have that definition on the top of my head to answer questions from the crowd. So if we had a handout that could give them the exact definition, I think that would help a lot.
Okay. And this is already on the website, but, it will continue to be once we finalize it. Okay. All right, Roger?
Well, I think we need to address short-term rentals, not only in terms of the impact on housing market, housing availability, but also in terms of the crowding of houses, foreign capacity of what septic systems in particular were designed to support. My understanding is that there may be some movement forward with Jordy Hutchinson's proposal, and I think it'll be interesting to see how that works out and what problems they might encounter or basically how it goes. And maybe that'll give us some thoughts on what we might do to provide additional affordable housing.
Okay, and that proposal still has not been to the planning board.
Right. And I guess one thing, when I look at it, I really don't know how you do it without some federal subsidizing. I represented Hearthstone Homes back in the 80s, and when the legislature was being developed, we got an $880,000 grant from HUD, and that enabled that to be built. And, we do have that. We got Christian Ridge, and that was not done with local money.
Okay, thank you, Doug.
Yeah, I agree with Vaughn and Roger with regard to short-term rentals. That certainly seemed to be a very important topic for the people that came to speak. As we've discussed amongst the board here, we need to come up with, I think, first a definition for what a short-term rental is. Once we have that in place and it's approved by the voters, then we can consider if and how we then regulate them.
Okay, all right, John?
So I'll continue with that one. Definition by a professional to define short-term rental, not by a committee of that just is putting words down. We need, if we're going to have a real definition, it needs to be ironclad because it'll definitely be challenged. Back to the housing. I think what we saw was a good dichotomy of people giving their comments. We have different tiers of housing because what we heard from the gentleman who owns a business is that, yeah, we can hire people for $15 to $20 an hour, and if we have to pay more than that, we might not be here. And those people actually said if it was 2 years, if they didn't buy 2 years down the road, they might not even be here right now. So what we know is the window of opportunity for people to move here, once the threshold got up near 500,000, the ship has nearly sailed for these people, because basically what you want to do there is you want to look at that tier again of what it takes for you to be affordable. And the Lakes Region Planning Commission woman said you need to be making $40 an hour. So if the gentleman who owns a business can only pay $15 to $20 an hour, those people are short $25 an hour to make their payments. So people in town aren't going to go belly up to try to pay them extra money because we'll have a bunch of closed shops in town. So there's a room there where people have to get to the $25 plus the 15 to make it to the 40, because then they're basically subsidized housing. And I think I don't think the town is going to provide housing as a start. I mean, they're pretty short on a lot of different other areas. And then we come back to the infrastructure. There was a sewer study that was done. It was brought out by the selectmen, and the sewer study question was pretty finite. Sewer question study asked if the people during COVID came to their second homes, would our infrastructure have enough capacity to take care of all that? And the answer was yes. And that's really was the basis of what I read in the sewer study. That was the question that the sewer study was based on. So outside of that, the only other study that was out there was Dave Ford's letter that said we have capacity for the 1,500 lots that we have currently existing out there. So if we need to do anything with raising the density, we need to look at our infrastructure and what that cost is going to be. So that's going to come right off the top. And other than that, I can look at Jordy's proposal with his investors as being a good thing.
Okay, all right. Brad?
Yeah, a couple of things. One is, I really believe we need to define the short-term rental to start with. That's one of the major driving forces for the values of properties in the town here, because, people from outside the town are buying them up so they can put them into the short-term rental program and get their money back out quicker, and they're looking at strictly as an investment. Regarding the sewer study, I know, Kathy, you and I had talked about that, and I did look at it a little bit. We did have a 2022 sewer report come in, and it's actually water and study on the water and sewer system, and it's being updated now by Woodward and Curran, and we haven't got that updated version of it yet. So we do have an older, it's when 2022 was probably based on 2021 figures and stuff there, back a couple of years here now. My thought on the utilities is obviously going to be a major player in this for any expansions going out into the core area here where it's available. Is one of the things I think we need to focus on as a town on this is going to be our inflow and infiltration into the sewer system itself. That's where we're losing a lot of our capacity. If we could take care of, reduce what's coming in from groundwater infiltration and stuff into the system, would give us a lot more room for expansion for housing to be hooked into it. I think that goes hand in hand there. So that's kind of my thought on how to not necessarily increase by expanding the system out further, but increase the capacity of what we already have so we could get those lots that are within range of it now to be able to tie into it and expand some development in those tracts of land there to increase the density that they would be allowed to make a development more affordable for everybody. So,
Okay. All right, thank you. Julie?
One thing that was pretty apparent to me at that meeting was that the general public doesn't really have a good grasp of what the planning board can and is allowed to do. I like Vaughn's idea of having a little handout, because this handout that we've got here with the housing information, most of this stuff we have absolutely no way of dealing with. It does, a lot of it's state stuff, a lot of it's federal stuff. It has nothing to do with the planning board. All we can do is try to make the rules, should we say, nice enough so that somebody would like to build something here at a lower rate to, let other people in. That's about all we can do with low income housing, is just make the rules easier to deal with. So I think a handout would be a very good thing for the next meeting, stating what we can do, what we can't do. That might get more people thinking on different ideas as we throw out the things that are just like, well, that's federal, we can't do anything about that. What can we work on? I did feel that we heard a lot of rehashing of stuff that we had heard before that people thought we voted on, but in reality, it was not voted on. They're still thinking that these things that have gone past in the past couple of years that were voted no on actually passed. So I think there's a lot of confusion as to what are the zoning rules now? What is on the books now? So I think some of that still needs to be reiterated a little bit in easy language for everybody to understand that, no, we can't do that because this is what we have, but we can do this. And if we fix our rules and our zoning laws, and, we can do the next piece. I feel some of that was confusing to people, the voters. I keep hearing from the public that it wasn't written so I could understand it, so I just voted no. So instead of asking anybody about it or trying to find out about it, they just said no. So we have to do a better job of explaining it simply as to why it is, what we're trying to do with it, and why it would be a good thing if we fixed it, why it would be better for all of us if we fixed it.
Right.
Not just like, well, we think we should just change it to purple because we didn't like the color. There's a reason that we're trying to do these things. We're trying to make something better or fix something that was done improperly, hence some of the word changes that are incorrect.
Okay, so more information about what we really can do.
What we're allowed to do.
Where we
yep.
are now.
And explain a little bit more about why we are trying to do some of these things. Like the reason we're changing that particular word is, sometimes the state says we have to. Sometimes we find out that there was a typo and we screwed up. Sometimes it needs to be tightened up a bit because it just doesn't read correctly like we were just doing tonight. Some of these sentences didn't read correctly until we all got together and hashed them out. That's what we can do. We can't do subsidized housing. That's not something the planning board can do.
Right. Okay, thank you. Tavis, did you want to say anything?
I did. I think when the planning board says we need a definition of short-term rental, I think the town needs to adopt a definition of short-term rental. Whether that's done as part of the zoning ordinance or something else, I think the town benefits from having a mechanism in place to define what it is and what the rules are. At the last meeting, Roger, and I'll mess this up, but was talking something about a health ordinance that would come up with things about number of people per bedroom, fire extinguishers, smoke and carbon monoxide detectors, evacuation routes, anything you want to add in that list of elements. There was a lot of that brought up in the short-term rental committee discussions. Most of those items are not really, back to Julie's point, what the planning board can and can't do. So I did speak with the planning board attorney briefly to find out what was involved in going down the avenue of a health ordinance. And one of the things that was suggested was a similar approach, but a different type of ordinance. It's not something that the planning board would do or to make part of the zoning regulation. And one of the reasons that was suggested as a possible option was it removes any question about whether something is covered by the new regulations or quote-unquote grandfathered, just to abuse that term. The state Supreme Court has recently said that residential is residential. You can call it whatever you want, but residential is residential. It makes it very hard for a zoning ordinance to apply, but something like call it a business license, if you will. You cannot be grandfathered from the requirement to have a business license. So if the town were to establish a licensing requirement for short-term rental operators, it would then have to define what a short-term rental is, what a short-term rental operator is. It's that type of prerequisite, such as owner or owner's representative shall be in town at all times, the rental use is in operation. Again, smoke detectors, the whole 9 yards, wherever that process would go. It takes some pressure off the planning board, but I think the reason I'm being sort of cagey about this, I just brought this idea to the town manager. He has yet to bring it to the selectmen. Ultimately, it would be a town ordinance, not part of the zoning ordinance. If that's not a direction the selectmen want to go, this board is right where it is. If that is not an option that the selectmen want to entertain as a regulation, and if the planning board wants to move forward with a warrant article for the definition of short-term rental, I think the board also needs to contemplate what zones short-term rentals, as, if the definition is approved, these are the zones it needs to go in. Because a lot of the feedback that I received after last year's town meeting was, you're saying no to new short-term rentals. And that's not what we, the public, meant. We just wanted more control over it because nobody really knew what it was. So if the planning board simply moves forward with a definition, that is the effect. If only a definition gets adopted, there aren't any regulations for it. You just said no more. Which perhaps if that were explained to the town, this is the first step, just to sort of freeze time, if you will, on short-term rentals, and then we'll come back with something later, that's perfectly fine. But I also am hesitant to have the planning board move forward with the definition if the selectmen perhaps go through with the licensing option and want a different definition.
So what's wrong with no more? I thought we were headed for we don't want any more because it is influencing the fact of loss of our housing stock.
It is, but it was pretty clear, particularly from the Chamber of Commerce, that it is part of the business model, and short-term rentals maybe aren't a bad thing.
We have a lot of them. Maybe we should limit additional.
I conceptually agree, and that's where the board landed last year. I said, if the board moves forward only with a definition, the effect would be everyone starting one after the adoption of a definition would be in violation because it's not a permitted use in any district, once you define it.
I think that's where we were going last year, 2 years ago, or whatever year that was.
That was last year.
Yeah.
I mean, the
Yeah, it
board
was just
has every
last year.
right to do the same thing. I just don't want the board to get discouraged if it goes down, because some people think short-term rentals are perfectly fine. You know, housing is, if you think of it in terms of a property owner, a property investor, well, that's the town's problem to figure out housing. I'm doing this.
Right, it's more profitable to do short-term rental than our long-term rental, generally, in a resort town anyway.
But I have a number of, I would say the majority of phone calls when last year's warrant article started circulating was people that were interested in buying now with the intent of doing short-term rental so that they could secure a property where they could then become a long-term resident of Wolfeboro. They wanted to buy now before the price went through the roof, and they had to cover that. I know we're not getting into personal finances here, but their goal was then to free up ultimately a house wherever they are and move up here.
But they could do the same with a long-term rental. It just wouldn't be as profitable,
Correct.
yeah.
Okay, John, you had suggested that we have a professional work on this. Is that what you,
Yeah, I don't think that, I'm not going to say we're not capable of it, but again, you need something that's going to be challenged.
So the only definition the state has right now is a vacation rental definition. There is no short-term rental definition by the state.
And you can't regulate vacation rental. That was one of the other things that came up during the short-term rental. There was a RSA that was passed that specifically says vacation rental can't be regulated.
So I would suggest board members keep thinking about what a definition might be, and perhaps after the public hearing on the 19th, I will be able to have some more feedback from the selectman and town manager about a different option.
I think we should circle back also, and if you could dig up the one that we ended on, because we were pretty much in agreement that it sounded really good as to the amount of days and what it was, and, you know, it was a pretty, in my mind, it sounded pretty fair.
But what it did do was fly in the face of people that want to rent 2 or 3 weeks in the summer only to help pay the taxes, which I don't think was necessarily the trap, if you want to call it the trap the planning board was trying to set.
But if we adopted a definition without any regulations, then we would initially have
hard stop
prohibited
everything, yes.
everything, and then the planning department would get to go through a grandfathering process, which then they might have to do again if we adopted regulations.
Correct.
So I think the system that you're describing is what North Conway's doing right now, and they've basically gone and said, okay, all you people, you have to come register, and nobody's coming and registering.
But that's enforceable. If you can demonstrate that someone is doing it without a license, that is a violation.
But they're just trying to create the program first, and they can't get people to create the program, so they're actually doing enforcement before they can even create the program.
Tavis, can we also, I'd never heard of that vacation rental thing. Could you maybe dig up that too?
Yeah.
To see if that's maybe what we're doing anyway?
Tavis, I just looked up New Hampshire RSA 48-A:1,
That's it.
subparagraph V reads, quote, vacation rental, unquote, or, quote, short-term rental, unquote, means, and it goes on. So it does use the words short-term rental.
Correct.
okay.
But then by
that's-
being in that same paragraph, are you precluded from regulating short-term rentals because
And
Right.
and
That's a
what
vacation
section is it in? Is it a business, is it in the housing section?
It's,
or-
what I was just reading from is Title, Roman numeral 3, Town, Cities, Village Districts, and Unincorporated Places, and Title 48A is Housing Standards Section, Definitions.
Oh, okay. All right. Okay, where do you want to go from here? I mean, I'd sort of like to get something on the warrant this year, but I'm concerned about that if we don't do it properly.
I guess question for Brad and Tavis, when do you think you might review or have feedback on what Tavis has just mentioned?
I don't know if Brad can answer that yet.
Okay.
What I will do is speak with the town manager tomorrow or early next week to flesh it out a little bit, see when that might be something, planning board attorney planted some seeds, but the town attorney would have to look at it. And then see if that's something, I mean, that would not be a town warrant article to do that. That would literally be a notice public hearing from becoming a thing.
But that is a health ordinance. It
No,
doesn't
no,
not-
it's a business license ordinance. It's not a health ordinance.
So,
If you want to do this, you have to have a license from the town. That also enables the town to, but I'm drafting in my head, if you will, would allow the town to say, here's a list of licensed short-term rentals in town. And I have a feeling if Wolfeboro started telling people who the short-term rentals were that were approved by the town, people would start clamoring to get on the list.
so my question to you is, do we have a complete program that has been professionally vetted that we know we can implement? Or like you just said, I'm doing this in my head. I don't really want.
Okay, I'll try to use words that you don't turn around on me.
Oh, I'm just saying.
The model is already in the town regulations. If you look at chapter 73, it talks about hawkers and peddlers. Who is it? What is it? How do you do it? All you do effectively is change hawkers and peddlers to short-term rental. What is it? How do you get a permit? What's it cost? How, who approves it? Who reviews it? Is there an annual renewal or not? Well, what's the violation? What's the appeal process, et cetera. It doesn't take long to do. I could have it to you, I would say it by the 12/5 meeting, but that's going to be a long night of public hearings. I don't think the board's going to want to perhaps dig into that. But by 12/19, I can have a discussion, and whether it's done officially at the Board of Selectmen meeting to consider moving forward with it, or it's conversational between town manager and selectmen to get the ball rolling.
Do we still have time to do it this year?
You wouldn't do it. It's a selectman
Yeah,
ordinance.
I know, but I'm talking about a zoning ordinance. We don't have time.
You have time to do it. What I don't know is if you have the ability to get the public up to speed.
Yeah,
Here's the
right.
definition, here's what it means, here's the zones it would impact.
So I would say, not
Procedurally, you've got tons of time.
Yeah,
not knowing how or if the select board's going to want to proceed, I would suggest that we need to go ahead on our path with the definition of short-term rental, so at least we're prepared and be able to quickly move once that decision is made.
So for that same 12/19 meeting, I can have last year's proposed definition, and we can talk about the different numbers, because is it 30 days or 31 days, whichever is less, 1 month, et cetera, or is it 7 days? Do we want to accommodate those that have always been renting for 2 weeks in the summer to help with their taxes? Maybe short-term rental is something shorter than 15 days.
If they've always been doing it, they get to keep doing it.
Not necessarily.
Oh.
The other
the-
point, Vaughn, I think, is that if they've already, I'm not saying that they are grandfathered, but assuming that they are grandfathered, will allow them to do it, certainly, but that doesn't exclude them from being regulated in how they do it.
So the problem with the term grandfathering is that the term grandfathering really doesn't mean anything, but it gets used a bit because people are generally okay with the concept of it. And I don't want to say too much more because that's going to prime pumps for people that might be interested in such a thing. But again, the Supreme Court has landed that residential is residential, and there is no distinction. So as long as a single-family home is occupied as a single-family home, the temporal element doesn't matter.
well, what came up at our committee meeting when we were meeting on this, and more recently, is that in the zoning ordinance, we do have, we've got a bed and breakfast where people have to come in, get an approval, and they have to meet certain standards. And there's another one, too. Well, hotel, but, I mean, that's sort
Hotel,
of way
motel,
up.
inn, yeah.
Boarding
Yeah,
house.
Right, yeah, but
So-
boarding houses, we don't allow.
One of the things I picked up on at the NHMA conference was a Supreme Court case, and I'm not going to pretend to remember the towns, but I can get it for you if you want. They were able to move forward by adding to their existing definition of one-family dwelling to bring it back to Wolfeboro. This is not intended to include transient uses similar to bed and breakfast, hotel, inn, et cetera.
Yeah,
That was the Portsmouth. That was
Yeah,
the
but that's
Portsmouth
that's
case.
not who went to court over it, not with the definition I'm talking about. But you still will then have to, okay, so then what is it? It's not that. You know, it's not a single-family home, so then what is it? But you end up having, for the planning board to pull it forward, as I understand it, you have to define the use and then say where it's allowed. If you simply define it and don't say which zones it's allowed in, with our zoning, it's not allowed anywhere.
okay.
So earlier you said that we couldn't go into people's houses. How do we go into people's houses when we create this?
If you create a license, you have to demonstrate it, and the method to prove that you comply with it is to get an inspection.
The inspection bit's the big deal.
It's like think of it like a driver's license. You don't just go in and say, yep, I know how to drive. They get in your car and you show them how to park and use your blinker and all that. It's the same basic premise. Zoning doesn't get you in the house, a license can. Zoning gives you the legal existing nonconforming potential argument, licensing does not.
And that would trip the little triggers of having the health officer go in, or the fire department, or.
Yeah,
And
if the
life safety
town,
things are the things that, you know, they got 20 people staying there for 3 nights running, you know, in a
well, that
in a
depends on
one-bedroom
the size
home.
of the house. So it would be
Yeah.
written more along the lines of, if the town believes it to be a 3-bedroom house and you hold it at 2 adults per bedroom, that's 6 people.
And that's your license, right?
Well,
yeah,
other
then-
than children, you don't,
Yeah, then you provide, I mean, if you have an approval process, then you can deal with parking and things, and that's one
yes.
of a complaint that we get a lot about. So, okay, all
So
right, well,
that's the part, Julie, where we can't go into their house when they've got more than 6 people
Right.
in there.
Right. But it also, you know, might solve some of those other problems that, you know, a bed and breakfast has a lot of legalities that they had to, you know, jump through hoops for a lot of different things,
yeah,
for the ability to, for some person not related to them to sleep over, basically, you
Well,
know?
it's interesting you say that, because my understanding in Durham, in order to be an approved short-term rental, you have to serve breakfast. But a short-term rental is not a bed and breakfast.
Donuts.
okay, well, we do have, I mean, you had sent the Alton one, or maybe you
Yes, that's
didn't
right.
send it. Did you send it to the
No, I
home?
didn't, I sent it to
Yeah.
you.
Yeah, right.
I sent it to
right.
you, but not to the group.
Yeah, okay. And we've got, have Meredith, and,
Yeah, but the Meredith one was,
That-
the Meredith one was to get in conformance to allow detached dwellings
Yeah.
on your lot.
Right,
And
okay.
that won't pass the test in our town
probably
because
will not.
Well, it's not the same thing either.
Yeah, yeah,
The
go ahead.
the link that was provided to the Alton short-term rentals I couldn't get it to work, but I did finally find the Alton zoning ordinance under the Board of Adjustment in Alton. So it's actually in there, and it's fairly easy to find if you manage to go to the Board of Adjustment on their website.
There is a whole application, though. I printed it out. It's 5 pages long for Alton's short-term rentals. So there's a process.
Do they get a license at the end, does it say?
Not if it's the zoning board.
So they just be approved for,
It- Zoning board
Well,
only
it has a
speaks,
list of offenses and how much they cost.
so it's acting like a, but isn't a.
Yeah.
So the selectmen are administrative board. They deal with administrative issues, so that's where their purview is. Planning board is the land use, so that's the difference.
And this is the Board of Selectmen document, this Alton version.
Yes.
It is
So
on their website.
when you dig into the weeds, and most of them, it's actually going through more of a license format than a zoning format.
Okay,
So I will have more at the 19th on that.
okay, all right, very good.
The other piece I handed out, I know it's not on the agenda,
Yeah, no, I was going to add it.
but there was some discussion, some of the recent voluntary lot merger applications about the condition on the mortgagee and the mortgager, things like that. So what I did is Roger found the exact language that I added to the voluntary lot merger form. It puts it right in there. In my discussion with the planning board attorney today, while not required, it could also be helpful on the application form where you fill it out to put a box that says, I certify that no mortgage exists on either property, or, yes, a mortgage does exist, and I have provided a copy of the letter saying that they're okay with it. With or without the boxes, the town doesn't have liability. However, if you put two properties together and one of them has a mortgage and then someone needs to foreclose, they're going to foreclose only on the portion that was covered originally, which now becomes an illegal subdivision in Wolfeboro. So I don't think a couple of check boxes would hurt.
No, I think that's a good idea.
That you don't have to vote on that. That's just an
Yeah,
application
well, that's a
form. but I want-
procedural thing, but we'll see it when we have a boundary line adjustment.
And again, at NHMA, just about every law firm you can think of is there, and they bounce the concept off of any. Only two of them had that scary scenario where someone tried to foreclose, and then they had to guide a town back out of it. So it's not rampant, but it's something we can easily avoid with this change.
Yeah, the other thing that we've talked to Tavis about is making some sort of an adjustment to the accessory dwelling unit so that applicants certainly would know that there's going to be a site visit, and the fact that there's a conditional zoning permit, and just reference that, I think.
Yeah, we're working on getting that on the
right.
form.
Okay, so
One of
that's
the-
going to be on the application.
Yeah, one of the other things that happens to be on the current application is that right at the top, it says new application with a checkbox or annual renewal. I don't know how or why it was added to the form, but the ordinance doesn't speak to it all, so I'm trying to clean up more than a couple of things with that one.
Okay,
But yes, we'll add the reference to that section.
Yeah, and just one other quick thing, the HSS, the soil survey, we've talked about that being outdated or not needed or whatever.
The HIS mapping?
Yeah. Yeah.
I will,
mean,
to use John's terms, I will get some opinions from people that do HIS mapping and find out when the state is looking for it, if they are looking for it, and where it may or may not make sense to keep in the zoning regulations from
yeah,
their side
right,
based on
but
state
that can
permitting.
be, we can deal with that through a public hearing for site.
That would be site plan or
Yeah,
subdivisions. That
right.
would not be a town warrant,
Right,
correct?
okay, all right, that's great.
Unless there's something in the zoning that I can't think of off the top of my head that requires it.
Yeah, okay. All right, public comment. Okay, let's see, minutes?
Yeah, I have some corrections.
Okay.
On page,
Roger doesn't?
I think I just beat him to the punch.
No, go ahead, Doug, sorry.
That's all right. At the bottom of page 3, on the hearing for Nicholas and Kelly Colopy, let's see, the first sentence should read, well, I'm sorry, I'll just read it out the way it should read, which is, Randy T. Trout, Norway Plains Associates, stated that the property is located on Canapache Road and serviced by private water and sewer, take out the word however, and then it should read, due to the lack of water pressure in the town, insert town between the and water. lack of water pressure in the town water line. The applicant received a waiver from the town so that they didn't have to tie into the line.
Okay,
And then at the very last sentence on that page, it should read, Randy Teetrolt noted that the town water will not be used due to a pressure issue, as opposed to the well water.
okay.
Roger, up to you next.
Oh, no, just, yeah, okay, go ahead, Roger, I've got one.
Merton says in the Merton subdivision is spelled M-E-R-T-E-N-S.
What page are you on?
I'm on page 5 at this point. And top of page,
Where on 5? I'm missing it.
well, I guess the third paragraph.
Starting Randy Tetro?
Yeah, it's the 1, 2, 3, 4th line down
On page 5?
on page 5.
Under discussion items,
Yeah.
third paragraph? Okay.
Yeah,
Okay,
And
top of page 6, the second.
We don't know what happened on page 5, Roger.
How do you spell Merton?
M-E-R-T-E-N-S.
Say that again, Roger? What?
MERTONS.
T-E-N-S.
MERTENS. And that appears
Got it.
twice.
okay, good.
And then on page 7, second paragraph, I believe it's Wittenbrook. I don't think it's Muralbrook.
Wittenbrook.
Witten Marsh and Mirror Brook.
Should be Wittenbrook, I believe.
Actually, I looked on old plans, it has a couple names. Depends on where you
The
look.
abutter referred to it as Witten. Emily Clark, I think, called it Witten. But I've never heard of a Muralbrook.
So Witten Marsh and Brook.
Yeah.
Might want to check with Julie again since they're continually updating stuff there. She's got the most recent.
I'll dig into it.
And then, although I recused myself on this on page 9, probably 3/4 of the way down, Holly Williams O'Coin noted the grant application deadline. It was November 30th, not December 5th.
Correct.
But I think we've made great progress on the minutes.
In general.
Yep.
So compliments to Michaela.
Right.
yes.
And one other, on page 5, halfway down where it was moved by Doug and to approve the subdivision. And then I stated there are no waivers. The form factor meets the R-zone district requirements, not the village residential. Okay. Any other? I'll make a motion to approve this with the corrections noted.
A second?
Okay, all in favor, please say aye. Aye. Opposed? Okay, great.
So can I ask a question about something that happened during one of the meetings? So it was, a sewer line was disconnected 20 years ago. So I got driving down the road, I was like, well, what's our process? We asked them to hook to the town sewer, and then there's a sewer system that's left in the ground. Do we have a decommissioning sewer situation where,
I thought they just always got left in the ground.
I was just asking, that's my question.
Yeah.
So
My understanding, yes. Buried in place.
And then they just stay there
Fade away?
forever and they don't get decommissioned, or, again, I don't,
Well, if it's not in use anymore, it would probably get buried in place. If it's
get buried,
buried in place, yeah.
yes. I didn't,
Are you talking about a septic system itself, you mean?
no, like the tank and stuff that's still in the ground there, what would you do? I mean, you wouldn't be asked to collapse it in and bury it? Or,
I had to
get
put a new
that's a
cover on
burden to
mine.
the homeowner when you ask them to hook to the system, I get that.
We had an old one that had it was a literal dry well, and the neighbor filled it full of sand, which didn't work. So when I had mine repaired because they wrecked it, I had to put a new cover on it, but I was not required to. I technically didn't have to do anything. I could have just left that empty hole right there and anybody could have fallen in. So I took it upon myself to put a little bit more sand in it and put a new cover on it. But there was nothing from any of the guys sitting in the trucks there. They didn't try to sell me anything, didn't try to do anything. They're just like, well,
Oh, if you're talking about a private septic system, the state would govern how that's dealt with. I thought you were talking more in terms of a pipe.
No, I was talking about his decommissioned system. Does the town have a policy to say,
The town doesn't have any policy on septic other than to say get state approval.
Everybody should go get a dog named Lassie,
In case you fall in the well.
because Timmy fell in the well. Sorry.
Let's not have the
You're dating
public thinking
yourself
the
on.
planning board is confusing septic tanks and wells. That would-
I know.
Okay, so next time we have the ADU, and there's a site visit at 3:30.
Yes, it's going to be a full agenda. I will try and get packets out early.
And there are a couple other items, I think, same night, so. Okay, all right, anything else?
No, there's actually 2 site visits, because you have the
Oh, gosh, yes.
special
that's
use
right.
permit
There
for
are two site
Willow
visits.
Street and the ADU site visit.
Okay, should we go to the ADU first and then?
I'd
meet?
have to look at the notice. I think one's at 3:30 and one's at 3:45, so
okay.
just
Oh,
go in the
all
right
right.
order.
Okay, so that'll be in our packet.
good.
All right,
And the Willow
So
Street.
that start earlier than 3:30?
No, I think one's at 3:30 and one's at 3:45.
Okay.
yeah, it's still pretty light, so it'll, okay, anything else?
I have a feeling if I went to 2 o'clock, nobody would be there. I mean,
Did I make a motion to adjourn?
Okay, second, all in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, okay, hey, happy Thanksgiving, everybody. Thank you. And